All right. The time being 6:30 and this being the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel, I will call to order the Monday, May 19th, 2025 meeting of Plymouth's Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel. At this time, pursuant to modifications made to the open meeting law by the Legislature of the Commonwealth, this meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Members of the panel are joining us here in person at the Great Hall at Plymouth's Town Hall. Other members of the panel, and perhaps members of the public, are joining us virtually over the Zoom webinar platform. Members of the public who wish to attend this meeting or participate in it may join us here at the Great Hall at Town Hall, or they may join us virtually over the Zoom webinar platform if they choose to do so. If they wish to join via Zoom, they can do so via the Zoom webinar login information and link that are included on the agenda that is posted on the NDCAP website. We will begin this meeting by taking a roll call of the members. We'll note that Mr. Moylan this evening is being replaced by Mr. Joe McDonough. So when I reach his name, I will say Mr. McDonough's name instead, but thank you for joining us. So from the top, Mr. Noyes.
Dave Noyes, Holtec Decommissioning International.
Joe McDonough, Decommissioning Project Director, Acting VP, representing Holtec.
Kelly O'Brien, Local 369.
Pine Dubois, appointed by the Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Mike Fortini, appointed by the Senate Minority Leader.
Mary Jo Gesslick, appointed by the Minority Leader of the Senate.
Kevin Canty, Vice Chair of the Plymouth Select Board and Select Board Representative on the NDCAP.
Jim Lampert, appointed by the Speaker of the House.
Mary Lampert, appointed by the Senate President.
And then on Zoom, currently the television is on a different view, so I can't see, but if you could, Mary Waldron.
Mary Waldron, Old Colony Planning Council.
Thank you. Mr. Priest.
Jack Priest, Division Director for the Radiation Control for the Department of Public Health, representing our Commissioner.
All right. Mr. Callahan.
Chris Callahan, representing EHS.
Thank you. Mr. Wade.
Greg Wade, representing the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities.
Mr. Gottlieb.
Andrew Gottlieb, appointed by Governor Baker.
And I believe I noticed we're joined by Kimberly Castle. Ms. Castle, are you here as a designee of someone?
Yes, good evening. This is Kimberly Castle standing in for David Bryant from Massachusetts Emergency Management.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, a quorum being present, this meeting can go forward. Always a good start. All right, so the first item on our agenda would be reading from 14 CMR 188.00, an act to promote energy diversity regarding the purpose of the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel. The panel shall serve in an advisory capacity only and shall not have authority to direct decommissioning of the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station. The duties of the panel shall be, in relevant part, to hold a minimum of 4 public meetings each year for the purpose of discussing issues related to the progress of decommissioning of the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station beginning on or about June 1st, 2019, or when the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station permanently ceases power operations, provided that the panel may hold additional meetings to advise the governor, the general court, the agencies of the Commonwealth, and the public on issues related to the decommissioning of the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station, with a written report being provided annually to the governor and to the energy committees of the general court, to serve as a conduit for public information and education on, and to encourage community involvement in matters related to the decommissioning of the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station, and to receive written reports and presentations on the decommissioning of the station at its regular meetings, to periodically receive reports on the Decommissioning Trust Fund and other funds associated with decommissioning of the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station, including fund balances, expenditures made, and reimbursements received, to receive reports regarding the decommissioning plans for the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station, including any site assessments and post-shutdown decommissioning assessment reports, to provide a forum for receiving public comment on these plans and reports, and to provide comment on these plans and reports as the panel may consider appropriate to state agencies and the owner of the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station, and in the annual report described in the enabling statute. Mr. Lampert?
I suggested last time that some of the rest of the statute be circulated to members because there are a lot of things in it, like what the membership is, what the voting requirements are. I don't believe that's happened, but I urge everyone every few months to reread the entire statute. It's not long, so you're aware of everything that's in it.
I believe our state support personnel did upload the entire statute to the website, so members of the panel may, and members of the public, may see that.
They can find it.
Yes, and there's a link on the main, like, splash page for the NDCAP to find that statute in its entirety. Anything else in regards to the reading of 14 CMR 188.00? Hearing and seeing none, we can move forward. The next item on our agenda would be the Holtec report. Mr. Noyes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the standing report includes our determination of the swim lanes for the current status of decommissioning activities. You'll notice a change that's been made to the swim lanes compared to previous submissions. So the existing decon and dismantlement have been broken down into radiological and non-radiological abatement and decommissioning to provide us with a little bit more granularity on the report. The project milestones, the top line remain the same. The next major milestone will be the submission of the license termination plan scheduled for September of this year. Radiological decon and dismantlement, no significant change to the development, still working toward the demolition of the reactor building and turbine building beginning in 2031 and continuing into 2034. For reactor segmentation, we are complete with the internals of reactor segmentation, are continuing on with the breakdown of tooling and equipment and the cleanup of the reactor cavity and dryer separator pit, anticipating drain down of the water in the cavity and dryer separator pit in early June. For radiological characterization, we continue on with concrete sampling and also soil sampling on site. For spent fuel management, nothing new to report, just continue to maintain the custodial responsibility for the fuel casks and the greater than Class C waste. Site restoration will follow the building demolitions, and waste management will update in a later slide. So for ongoing demolition activities, we continue with the removal of the previous emergency planning zone sirens. Those siren removals will complete this week. We are currently at 112 of 113 sirens removed. Also ongoing at the plant is the dismantlement and recycle of the previous main transformer. This was the transformer at the site that took the 24 kV, 24,000 volt output of the main generator and stepped it up to 345,000 volts in order to be able to support the transmission onto the grid. Transformer is no longer required, and the pictures you see are the crane involved in dismantlement of that main transformer. For upcoming internal demolition activities, we have two asbestos abatement activities upcoming. One is the combined intermediate valves that we've discussed at past meetings. These are 20-inch turbine steam supply valves, and we are working on the approvals with the Mass DEP for the asbestos abatement activities for these combined intermediate valves. Also, development of the gland seal condenser asbestos abatement for work associated with a piece of equipment that actually removed steam from the turbine glands when the plant was operating. The map has not changed. We still have active demolition shown in the Ritu building, which is the light yellow colored building toward the center left of the picture, and the remaining buildings as were currently statused. For ongoing water volume update, so the water volume on site effective May 15th, 831,802 gallons. That represents a reduction since the last report from 844,037 gallons, so down 12,235 gallons in the last 2 months. The heaters remain in the spent fuel pool and the reactor cavity, but are de-energized. With the plan to drain 382,000 gallons from the reactor cavity and dryer separator pit to the torus. You may note that that figure was previously 425,000 gallons that was intended to be drained, but the evaporation has lowered the volumes in those in the dryer separator pit and the reactor cavity that will reduce the amount that needs to be lowered to the torus to that 382,000 gallon figure. So a reminder that that cavity drain down will be from the reactor cavity and dryer separator pit, leaving approximately 450,000 gallons in the spent fuel pool. The 382,000 gallons will be drained from the cavity and dryer separator pit, will be drained to the torus. For regulatory update, we have exited the NRC's first quarter inspection for this year with no findings of more than minor significance. We have submitted the report on the status of decommissioning funding for reactors, and I'll talk about that in a separate presentation. We've also submitted the annual radiological environmental operating and radioactive effluent release reports. They were submitted on the 14th of May, and be happy to discuss those at our next meeting. We continue with the appeal of the surface water discharge permit amendment denial, with the appeal hearings set to begin on June 12th. So for site source term reduction, we continue to transport some Class B and the majority of Class A waste as it's generated, bringing the total 2025 year to date of just under 18,000 cubic feet and 110 curies of activity total for the project of just under 300,000 cubic feet and over 2,000 curies of activity. That ends the presentation, pending questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Noyes. So we do have on our agenda later items for the MCP Phase 3 report and the decommissioning fund update. So those will be presented on separately. We will hold questions on those until after those relevant presentations. But do we have any questions in regards to the report we just received? And I see Mr. Gottlieb's digital hand.
Yeah, thank you. What were the findings of minor significance, and how many of them were there?
That's a standard language. There's that the NRC identifies in the inspection report comments and then findings of significance. So there were some comments given on performance, basically things that the inspector saw that they were on site, some positive, some negative, but none that rose to the level of a violation in the NRC's regulatory space.
But how many of them were there? I mean, they felt that they were worth noting. So how many exceptions from the standard operating protocols or NRC standards were there that they felt were worth noting, if not significant?
I don't know the exact number. We conduct daily debriefs when the NRC is on site, so we're continually taking that kind of feedback as opportunities to improve.
Don't they, as a matter of practice, give you a written summation of their inspection report that indicates what they found, and would not, if that's true, would that not be the place where you were told how many findings of minor significance there were?
They only document items that are more than minor.
So there's no way for anybody to know what the nature of that conversation was then?
Just the people that are privy to the conversation. The plant takes the feedback, and when necessary, we put it into our corrective action program in order to be able to make necessary improvements.
So effectively a private conversation between yourselves and the NRC, to which nobody in the public or this committee is privy then, right?
That would be true.
Okay. Why mention it then?
Just to give you the results of the inspection, whether there are findings of significance or not, we'll always report out on that.
Okay, and then you mentioned that the waterfall chart has 2031 as the date when final demolition of the core reactor build. What magic happens in 2031 that allows that to happen then?
It's assuming that we have resolution on final disposition of the water.
Does it assume what the outcome of that is?
Yeah, it assumes a positive outcome. It assumes that we are permitted to be able to discharge that water.
And what if you're not?
Well, then we'll have to make adjustments to the schedule.
So the schedule doesn't really have any value in terms of telling us what's going to happen, given that you currently have a denial, right?
Well, it has underlying assumptions in it, and it's continually being evaluated.
Okay, so this schedule, this is now a best case scenario that has you judicially overcoming DEP's denial, right? And if that doesn't happen, we're looking at something after 2031.
Well, there are several stages to the process, not just the Mass DEP appeal, but other legal avenues that are also available that could be included within that 2031 timeframe.
Like what?
Like federal court.
That's what I said. You're assuming that that the DEP action is judicially overturned in order for that date to hold.
Yes, at some stage, yes.
So there is no plan at this point that you're willing to share that contemplates that not happening. So
that is not in our current schedule or estimate, no.
So there's no plan other than overturning the DEP determination allowed you to go to full.
It's not in our estimate. It's not in the schedule that we have provided, the cost assessment and the schedule for activities.
But you do have a plan?
There would certainly be other alternatives. We've talked about the alternatives that would be associated with the water disposition ultimately.
But the thing you're telling the public now is predicated on a reversal of the current regulatory determination.
That's correct.
Thank you.
All right, other questions? Mr. Lampert?
No, you go ahead. Okay. 3 or 4 questions today. First off, at the last meeting, I asked, and you had said you would get back to us on trying to get cubic feet into tons. You said you could provide that information.
Yeah, I haven't got it yet, but I do have that request.
When would you expect to get it? It's been 2 months.
Yeah, I should have it by the next meeting.
So 4 months? Could you
Yes.
circulate that information earlier if you have it?
If I do, I will.
Okay. You were also asked at the last meeting, I believe, of Mr. Canty, whether you would be able to give a sense without getting a number, frankly, without getting into detail on how much has been withdrawn from the decommissioning trust fund to pay legal expenses.
Yeah, that we've got a separate agenda item for that, but we are not going to provide the information of legal expenses that have been paid from the decommissioning trust fund.
Do you report the withdrawal of legal expenses to the NRC?
We make the information available to them at their request. So
Have you made it available?
We provide the same written report that is docketed that I'll report out on here today, and the NRC chooses to provide additional inspection if they deem it necessary.
Have you provided them the total legal expense?
We have not provided them, we have not been requested and have not provided them with anything after their evaluation of our 2023 submittal.
You mentioned the 382,000 gallons that will be diverted, among other things, to the Taurus, et cetera.
Yes.
When will that happen?
It'll happen the first week in June.
You also mentioned that I gather that you have submitted the affluence release report, and I assume that's for the calendar year 2024?
That's correct.
Will you circulate that to the panel, please?
Yeah, as soon as the NRC acknowledges receipt, then I can circulate that to the panel.
When was it sent in?
It was sent in on April 15th.
And they have not yet acknowledged receipt? We're over a month out.
Right, yeah, they have not put it into Adams, so I'm not sure that they have, I'll check with them, and if they've got it and have done everything that they need to do with it, I'll make it available.
Okay. And the last question I have is following up on, I believe, on Mr. Gottlieb. You have a number of options for disposing of this water. How many of those would permit you to dispose of it by 2031?
The only one that I know of that supports building demolition by 2031 is liquid discharge.
But
I don't have any data that indicates that that the other options would be options that are viable or that the company would select prior to 2031.
Well, I believe Holtec has said that they all are viable. So I guess my initial question is could you evaporate all the water by 2031?
We have chosen not to evaporate the water.
That's not my question.
Could we?
The question is, could you?
Yes.
Could you ship it off-site by 2031?
Yes, but we have chosen not to.
Thank you.
Mrs. Lambert.
Yes, and a follow-up, that you could choose to ship it off-site. I would just make note of the fact that Vermont Yankee, a sister plant to Pilgrim, but run by a different company, chose to ship off-site, and they're now starting to take down the reactor building. And so your choice has delayed to a considerable degree the decommissioning process getting to site release, which obviously has an impact to Plymouth and will have an impact to what's the decommissioning trust fund. One question, I have two questions. One, we had asked that you circulate this report to the panel prior to the meetings, and the intent was not 10 minutes prior to the meeting, but in enough time so that we could see what you're going to say, to do a little research so we could come up with questions. Do you intend to send the material prior to the meeting, like within a week?
I will send it at least day of, as I did earlier today. I sent it this morning to the chair, which is the way that I had sent it in the past. I won't send blanket communications to the entire committee because of concerns of making sure that everything is done properly.
Well, you could send it to the chair.
And I did.
More than the morning of. It would be a courtesy and one that is appreciated, and it is a request.
All I can commit to, because it does have layers of internal approval to make sure that we're conveying accurate and transparent information, is to get it the morning of.
Also, you started your presentation saying decontamination, dismantlement of radioactive and non-radioactive material. In your presentation, you just talked about radioactive, but not non-radioactive, chemical and metals.
Right, so there are some activities that show on the new waterfall chart, specifically the removal of non-radiological underground structures that you'll see in the
well, actually, I can't see it, but what's the number of the slide? Because Frank, I can't see it. No, I'm sure the audience can't see it either. And I have glasses on.
So it's scheduled the removal of the subgrade structures for non-radiological structures, scheduled in 2029 and 2030.
Okay, but then question number two, there's a mixture of the contaminants. And
That would be, then it would fall under the category of radiological.
Oh, so if it's chemical and radiological, it's listed under radiological?
That's correct. So the demolition of, say, the reactor building structure would be under the radiological decon and dismantlement line.
Okay. And then there's separate just for chemical. If you're assuming there is no radiological mix.
Chemical or no hazard. So there could be like underground cable vaults, concrete, building foundations that have no radiological contamination associated with them. They may or may not have oil and hazardous material.
You can see why I was confused. What's happening. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Dubois?
Yes, thanks very much. I'm a little, maybe hard of hearing, I don't know, but were you talking about the RAD report that was distributed on or released on May 14th?
Yes.
Is that available now to the rest of us that I can get?
As soon as I know that the NRC has received the report and accepted it, I'll make it available to everybody.
Okay.
I did look in Adams. It is not available in the NRC's Adams database yet.
Okay, great. And how about the comprehensive site assessment? Is that available? I thought we were going to get that, and I've been looking for it, but might not have hit my email, I don't know.
The Phase 2 report?
Yes, I guess.
I'll get that posted to the SharePoint. It's a large file,
Right.
so I'll get it posted to the DCOM SharePoint.
Do we have a DCOM SharePoint?
Holtec does.
Will you send that SharePoint around? Is that how? we
Yes,
get it?
I'll
Okay,
send around the
awesome.
link to it. It's a public SharePoint.
Okay, I think that's great. And I just wanted to point something out, because I know my colleague over there, Ms. Lampert, keeps pointing out to how quickly Vermont Yankee got rid of its waste, but that facility has a rail yard there. They're capable of doing things that we're not capable of doing. You can't make that kind of stuff happen if you don't have the infrastructure. Thanks very much, Mr. Camp.
You're welcome. Mrs. Gatzlick?
Actually, this is a question from Mrs. Lambert. Mrs. Lambert, the last meeting you said, you were talking about the DOE identified a problem related to rad waste shipments along Route 44, and you indicated that you would get back to us. So can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, it was an overpass that was not, could not accommodate the height, and therefore it would be necessary to take down the overpass if, in fact, 44 was going to be a choice.
Okay.
And so I understand the choice then was made, which seems prudent economically and for traffic, to head down Route 3 to the canal and go that way.
Okay, because I was trying in my mind to figure out where that overpass was on 44. That was.
I think it's the first one,
On the new Route 44?
new Route 44.
Okay, thank you very much. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah, it was in the DOE report, so that was an issue.
You know, that'd be great if you would provide Mr. Canty a copy of that so he can share with the rest of the group.
Ah,
Thank you.
I'll look deep, but I'm sure also David has it. Noise.
A DOE report?
A
that
DOE
identified-
report that analyzed the various routes for transport of spent fuel from various reactors. And so there is a chapter for Pilgrim, and there was an analysis made.
Well,
That-
if you have a copy of the report, it'll save
Yeah.
time for us hunting it.
I will look.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Any other questions for Mr. Noyes on this first
Yeah,
item?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Gottlieb?
one follow-up. Mr. Noyes, I just want to make sure I heard you. I just want to make sure I heard you correctly, that in answer to Mr. Lampert, that you would be able to evaporate by 2031 if you so chose.
With, yes, yeah, we could certainly implement a technology independent of, without the consideration that we have currently given to radiological releases, to evaporate at a much higher temperature and actively evaporate the water in order to be able to eliminate that waste prior to 2031.
Okay, I'm a little puzzled by that in the sense that we've had numerous attempts to get an estimate of evaporation rates, and we've been told consistently, for reasons that I don't understand, that that was impossible. So what is different about the analysis you undertook in this instance to be able to make this assertion when in past times you've been unable or unwilling at least to give an estimate of the rate of evaporation and how long that would last?
So as I've discussed before, the inability to be able to make an estimate as to how long it will take to evaporate under the current set of conditions where we heat the water in order to be able to heat the buildings results in a temperature of approximately 90 degrees or 90 to 100 degrees of the water in the spent fuel pool. That water is going to be, the amount of evaporation is going to be significantly dependent on a number of conditions, including humidity, environmental conditions, the airflow over the surface of the water. if the plant were to actively engage in active evaporation of the water using a heating system that heated the water to 212 degrees, I could tell you exactly how much time it would take in order to be able to perform that evaporation, because that's under a very, very controlled, very specific set of circumstances.
But all the elements that are constraining, the atmospheric, humidity, how much what's exposed and what isn't exposed, those all remain factors. So they're knowable with certainty in one scenario, but utterly and completely unable to be estimated under any other scenario. Is that what I'm asking?
They're not, the humidity and ambient conditions don't come into play in an active evaporation scenario.
So, yeah, and lastly, by putting in the heating elements, you are actively, at a lesser rate, you are currently actively inducing a higher evaporation than the ambient condition would permit, correct?
We are heating the water for the purposes of heating the buildings, and that does
evaporating as a
and
byproduct of
that does
activity,
result in
correct?
higher amounts of evaporation. That's correct.
So it's all a matter of degree, literally.
Any other questions from any other members of the panel before we move
Well,
forward?
actually, I do. I have one more question.
Ms. Ganslick?
Thank you very much. David, you are not, and this is to reference to Mr. Gottlieb's comments, the company does not plan to use evaporation. What you're doing right now that the heaters are off, is just natural evaporation, what happens with every pool. And when you're heating the water in the spent fuel flow, it's for the creature comfort of the people working up on the refuel floor and the rest of the building, and to keep material from being impacted by colder weather. So to me, I'm just looking, it's frustrating to hear people talk about Holtec evaporating when that's not the case. You're not doing it under the carpet, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We've been very, I think, transparent on exactly what's going on at the plant. It was subject to NRC inspections. It was published. We have made the decision not to actively evaporate water to the degree that would result in large-scale evaporation, because it's less predictable deposition within the community beyond the site boundary. We've made the decision not to ship the water for disposal because we believe that it's violation of social justice principles, and that its disposal results in 3 times the volume that the disposition via liquid discharge would, and the possibility of potential accidents associated with that transfer. So we have made that decision, in answer to your question, not to use either of those 2 methods for water disposition.
Yeah. Thank you for that point of clarification. I appreciate it.
Mrs. Lampert?
Yes, I would not want just the viewpoint that was just expressed be the only part of the public record. When you talk about social justice, transporting what is called low-level radioactive waste, according to you, is a potential violation of social justice. But according to Holtec, transporting extremely high-level spent fuel rods from around the country to a potential interim storage site in New Mexico is the ultimate.
The phrase Holtec used is the epitome of social justice.
Epitome of social justice. I see a conflict. I also see a conflict when asked to Holtec, whether it's Trice, doesn't matter who it is, or to Dr. Singh, transportation accidents. Have there been transportation accidents anywhere? Oh, no. It is very, very safe. Nobody has to worry about transportation accidents. So, to have trust To have credibility, I think you ought to get off that whole line. I think it's important because it doesn't make sense. Out of one mouth, you're saying one thing. Out of another mouth here, you're saying another thing. That is just a piece of advice.
So, members of the panel are reminded and encouraged to please not speak without being recognized so that we can have an orderly meeting. I will continue to recognize folks. You will have an opportunity to make your statements, but please do not interject without being recognized. Thank you. Mrs. Gaslick.
Just, Mrs. Lambert, when you're talking shipping dry active waste versus shipping liquids, two totally different scenarios. Liquids can, if you have a hazardous waste spill, it's harder to clean up, any kind of spill, it's harder to clean up a liquid than it is a solid. I'm confident, and from my experience, because I was working in Radway shipping before, I know what goes into packaging that material. I'm not worried about that stuff going down the road. I'm more concerned about water going down the road or other liquid waste going down the road. Not even radioactive. You go by tankers all the time. It's really hard to remediate a site when there's a liquid
Recording
spill.
in progress.
It's easy to remediate a site when it's a solid that you can pick up, scrape up from the ground. And I think people need to understand that, the public needs to understand that there is a big difference. And it's just, they need to hear both sides of the argument, not just, oh, it's bad, bad, bad. These people take pride, the safety of the public is upmost when they're packaging rad waste shipments. They're dry active waste and filters. They're all solid, easy to pick up. The transport casks are very robust. They've been through impact, they've been through studies. So it's frustrating to me to not give the whole story instead of just cherry picking it here and there. Then I'm done. Thank you.
Excuse me.
Mrs. Lampert?
Yes. I'm sorry to frustrate you. However, guess what? You can't get it out of Cape Cod Bay, and you can't get it out of the air. So if you're talking about getting a liquid spill, granted, it is difficult, but it can be done. If you drop a spent fuel pool cask, or more likelihood, whether it's attacked in a terrorist attack, then you're in real trouble, although it's solid. So I'm not going to get into an argument to upset you about picking up, but I just want to make the point. You can't get it out of Cape Cod Bay if you dump it there, and you can't get it out of the air if you evaporate it. So I think evaporation or dumping in the bay presents a greater problem.
Mrs. Gatzlick.
I'm sorry. Mrs. Lambert, you realize that as you're breathing in tritium. It's naturally occurring isotope. It's out there right now in the bay as a naturally occurring isotope. Human bodies are great. We live on a radioactive planet. They are marvelous at taking that kind of exposure and not being impacted by it.
A baby ain't.
Any other questions in regards to the Holtec report from members of the panel? Yes, we will. I did receive it. I had not had an opportunity to distribute it to the panel, but I will distribute it to the panel. If there are no other questions from other members, just for clarification purposes, Mr. Noyes, you mentioned that that report you submitted to the NRC was not in Adams. I assume that's an online database of some kind? And is that accessible to members of the public, or is that, okay, okay.
And I would point out...
Mr. Lampert, you have not been recognized.
Fine,
Would you
wait,
wish to
excuse
be
me?
recognized? Thank you.
May I be recognized?
You may.
Or just point out that Adams can be a horrible instrument to try to find anything. But if you will Google such things as Holtec's, the report they just submitted, their financial report, you can get it straight from Google without having to go through what I'll refer to as the agony of Adams.
Okay, thank you. All right. With that, we can move on to the next item, which would be the MCP report, agenda item.
We pulled that up. The presentation is going to be made by Matt Daly from ERM. I'll call up the presentation.
So we are going to, just for purposes of people viewing that can't hear, we're going to be receiving a presentation that is being pulled up on the screen, and we will wait momentarily for that to occur.
On the screen, so you'll need to admit him.
Okay, we are being joined virtually by the presenter. We do have a David Noyes login. That is, okay, you have the floor.
I have the floor.
Yes, you do. Thank you. Please introduce yourself, and then you may proceed.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Matthew Daly. I'm an environmental consultant. I work with the company Environmental Resources Management. We go by the short letter ERM, so you'll see that on these slides. That's the company. And I am joined tonight with my colleague, John Drabinski, who's the licensed site professional LSP for the ongoing MCP activities, Massachusetts Contingency Plan, at the parcels that we're showing you on this map. So from a logistics standpoint, I was provided a link to this ND cap from Dave Noyes directly, and so that's why on this Zoom I'm showing up with Dave Noyes. But again, my name is Matthew Daly, and my colleague John Drabinski, he's also probably showing up as Dave Noyes because we both followed the link that Dave provided to us. So from a non-radiological standpoint, this is what we're going to go through a couple of slides here is to kind of summarize some of the highlights that went into a MCP Phase 2 Comprehensive Site Assessment Report that was submitted to the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection back on April 21st, 2025. This MCP Phase 2 report summarizes the results of recent site investigations on 2 parcels of land that are owned by HDI. Those 2 parcels include on the figure to the right, the 140-acre industrial parcel, which is the parcel where the former power plant was operating and generating electricity, where there's an associated number of support buildings and parking lots. And this report also documents recent investigation activities completed on the outer perimeter area number 3, which is kind of the parcel in white to the southeast of that industrial parcel, and that's along the Powerhouse Road. It goes all the way as far south as State Road in Plymouth. So this report that we just submitted again in April documents 28 new soil borings that had been advanced at both parcels over the last several years. 16 of these soil borings were drilled and installed on the industrial parcel to allow us to collect sufficient shallow soil samples as well as soil samples from 5 to 8 feet below ground surface. And there's also for Para 3, that outer perimeter area to the south, there was 12 locations where soil borings were recently installed for the collection of soil samples. The report documents 9 new monitoring wells that were drilled, constructed, and installed. All of these 9 new monitoring wells are on that southern or perimeter area 3, Para 3 to the south. And the report documents groundwater sampling activities that have been completed at the site. There are over 60 monitoring wells between both the industrial parcel as well as Para 3. And so comprehensive groundwater sampling activities have been completed in October of 2023, November of 2024, and February of 2025 for non-radiological constituents. And those results are all documented in this report. Go to the next slide. So on this slide and the next couple of slides, we're going to kind of go through some of the highlights that are in this Phase 2 Comprehensive Site Assessment Report. And we'll start out with the documentation of 8 underground storage tanks that were formerly at the site, have been removed from the industrial parcel. So these underground storage tanks are tanks that contained either fuel oil for heating, for former heating systems, as well as diesel fuel for generator type systems. So I've got a table on the slide that kind of shows you the capacity of some of these underground storage tanks. And as far as the removal dates, they were removed from 2022 to the July 16th, 2024 timeframe. The removal of an underground storage tank in Massachusetts has to follow regulatory requirements. So there was an LSP on site during the removal of these storage tanks, as well as the town of Plymouth's fire department was on site to witness the removal of these tanks. There's reports that were submitted by the LSP that were included in this phase 2 comprehensive site assessment report, and essentially no soil impacts were observed or documented by either the fire department or the LSP during removal of these storage tanks. And I think from a groundwater standpoint, these tanks look to be like they were not a source of any kind of petroleum type release at the site. We really do not see petroleum impacts in the multitude of groundwater wells that we have at this site. So again, this is one piece of information that's been compiled in this phase 2 report. As far as some of the more common non-radiological constituents that we are seeing at this site, it's per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS for short, which are continuing to be detected in groundwater. And so most of the PFAS is something that the more people look for it in groundwater, no matter what the industry is, the more they're finding it. And the most common source of high levels of PFAS that people will see is from aqueous firefighting foams. And so as part of our process, we spoke a lot with HDI, and as far as all the records that they have at site, there's no history of any kind of aqueous firefighting foam history at the industrial parcel or the Para 3 parcel, where there's also these PFAS in groundwater. We also inquired with the town of Plymouth's fire department to identify any potential records that they may have of maybe they were firefighting a car fire or something at the site, or whether it could have been off-site. And they have no records of using aqueous firefighter foam. So what it seems to be at this point is like what many people are seeing in the environmental industry is the PFAS that we're detecting at the site are not identifying any specific point source. So one of the more, this most recent evolution of site characterization was to do a lot of soil sampling for PFAS to see if we could identify if there was some specific area of the site that's contributing to the PFAS that we see in groundwater. And of all the soil sampling for PFAS that we did, we have not detected any PFAS concentrations above a regulatory standard that would indicate any kind of point source. At the industrial parcel, when we look at the PFAS in groundwater, we're seeing that, there's, when you sample a water well and have it submitted to a laboratory for PFAS, you get like 30 plus individual compounds with results and what those concentrations are. When we look at the industrial parcel, what we see is that there's kind of a lot of variability in which specific PFAS compound we're seeing at different well locations, where again, if there was a single or multitude of aqueous firefighting events, what you typically see in those sites is kind of a very consistent signature of PFAS kind of in the downstream groundwater flow direction of where those firefighting activities have occurred. But again, we are not seeing that. We're seeing highly variable individual concentrations of individual PFAS compounds. At Para 3, there's 7 wells up there that have just been sampled for PFAS, and there's only one of those 7 wells that has PFAS in it. We just recently installed monitoring wells, cross gradient, up gradient, down gradient of where we first had identified PFAS in Para 3, and we're not seeing it in any of these new monitoring wells. So we're going to continue to do quarterly sampling of groundwater through the remainder of this calendar year, and that's going to be both monitoring wells on the industrial parcel as well as all the wells now at Para 3 to kind of continue to collect data to make decisions going forward on the PFAS. Next slide. Here is a figure to kind of show you some of the details on the PFAS detections on the industrial parcel. So what we're showing you here is a map with locations of monitoring wells and with the results of PFAS that were analyzed from these monitoring wells in February of 2025. So what we have in here is if the monitoring well identification name and the value you see is in red, that would be a groundwater sample that is above the Massachusetts drinking water standard for PFAS. And if the well is colored in black and the value is in black, that would be a location where the groundwater sample was below the Massachusetts drinking water standard. So again, at this site, as well as Para 3, on-site groundwater is not being used as a source of drinking water. All drinking water is being supplied by the town of Plymouth and the water division there in town. And at the bottom of this table, we've got a table here that kind of shows the bottom of the figure. We have a table that kind of summarizes from a Massachusetts regulatory standpoint, what are the different standards that we must use to compare these groundwater samples to. So in the state of Massachusetts, from a groundwater standpoint, there are 6 specific PFAS chemicals that, if detected, you add up their concentrations and compare them to a standard of 20 nanograms per liter. So everything we're showing you on this figure that's in red, when we do that summation process, we're above that 20 value. And then again, as I indicated earlier, the locations in black, the sum would be less than the 20. And then, so again, GW1 is a Massachusetts standard for consumption of drinking water. Again, that nobody here at this site is drinking groundwater currently. And then the other applicable standard would be GW3. That would be groundwater for the protection of surface water. And the standards that the state has, you can see they're very large, and the detections that we have at this site, the highest value we have on this figure is about 270 nanograms per liter. These concentrations are orders of magnitude below those GW3 protection of surface water values in that table. Go to the next slide. So continuing on with some of the highlights in this MCP Phase 2 Comprehensive Site Assessment Report. Other constituents in groundwater are either isolated to one individual monitoring well, or they have not been consistently detected over time. Again, we have more than 60 wells out here across the whole site. So the constituents that have been detected would be the benzoate-pyrene, the arsenic, and the vanadium. Those are basically being detected at one well. In the case of benzoate-pyrene, it was detected in 2021 groundwater sample, but it has not been detected in several events since that 2021 event. And cadmium and lead were historically metals that were never detected, but the laboratory had high detection limits. And so we've gone out to all of the wells and sampled them to get kind of better quality groundwater samples to show us that these 2 metals, cadmium and lead, are not being detected, and the laboratory is giving us data that's below the regulatory standard for those 2 metals. So as I indicated with the PFAS, we're planning to do quarterly groundwater sampling for the remainder of this 2025 calendar year. And these metals that we're looking at here at this top number 3 bullet, those will be part of this ongoing quarterly sampling campaign. From a soil standpoint, polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, they have been detected in 3 of 6 soil piles that are present on the Para 3 property. The origin of these soil piles is unknown dumping. So if you've seen, whether it's your own house or somebody else's house, like a landscaper drops off mulch, they have a truck, they back it up, and they drop the mulch, and it leaves a nice pile of mulch. There's essentially 6 discrete piles of soil in the Para 3 property based on reviewing aerial photographs, historical aerial photographs, they first appear in about a 2001 timeframe. So they've been out here for some time. And again, there's no documentation with regards to how those piles got there when they were dumped. And essentially, since it's PCBs and they are detected in 3 of those 6 piles, that means that the PCBs out there are going to be under the Environmental Protection Agency's Toxic Substance Control Act. They basically have control over handling of PCBs in an environmental standpoint. So HDI is in the planning stages to have those soil piles physically removed from the Para 3 property. We'll have to send that soil to an EPA TSCA certified. TSCA is the acronym for Toxic Substance Control Act, at a landfill that will accept TSCA type wastes. And that again will be completed in the 2025 calendar timeframe, and there'll be additional reporting through the MCP process associated with that work evolution. And then the phase 2 comprehensive site assessment report does include what we're calling an MCP interim risk characterization. And it's interim in the sense that the current conditions at the industrial property, as well as the Para 3 property, they kind of reflect the interim risk characterization was completed because it reflects current site conditions versus the ultimate end state of the property, which would be understood at the time when all of the buildings have been decommissioned and the site has been achieved a kind of a partial site release, which will go on the next slide. And the risk characterization is going to be, again, reperformed. The one that we have in this most recent report, it's interim. We're planning to reperform it after all the demolition activities have been completed at the industrial parcel. Those demolition activities are going to allow access to additional areas of the site where we can get additional characterization completed. And then again, at that point in time, they'll be under the final site restoration activities would be underway. So as far as the MCP deadlines and how they line up with the settlement agreement, so we just kind of wanted to have a slide here that kind of shows kind of where we've been from an MCP process over the last couple of years and kind of where we see this going into the future. So at the very top of the slide, I have a general MCP timeline graphic coming from Massachusetts DEP. At the very top of that, they identify kind of the major reports that are submitted or milestones completed as part of an MCP process. And at the bottom of that graphic, I've kind of added in there the dates to reflect kind of where we are at this HDI property. So again, initial site characterization at HDI, these parcels started in late 2020, continued into 2021. In 2021, the first release condition was notified to Mass Department of Environmental Protection. That resulted in a report that was filed in that 04/22 or April 2022 timeframe. That was the tier classification phase 1 initial site investigation report. So then moving from left to right along this graphic, where the green star is, that would be the report that we've been talking about in these slides. That's the phase 2 comprehensive site assessment report that was filed in April of 2025. And then looking forward in time, according to the MCP timelines, next year, next April 2026, we'll be looking to submit the phase 3 MCP phase 3 remedial action alternatives and the phase 4 implementation of remedial alternatives. And then by April of 2027, we're looking to be issuing a temporary solution statement under the MCP process. And then at the bottom of the slide, there's other deadlines that are kind of in that 2020 settlement agreement between Holtec and the state of Massachusetts. And there's deadlines in there and provisions regarding site restoration and environmental requirements. One being that the MCP permanent solution statement would be filed at the time of partial site release. Based on the current decommissioning schedule by HDI, that partial site release timeframe is looking to be the 2035 timeframe. So that means that between, current 2025 through 2035, there'll be continuing site characterization and risk characterization as the decommissioning activities progress. And then at the 2035 timeframe, that's when we would be looking to move from a temporary solution under the MCP to a permanent solution under the MCP. And that would be consistent with what's in that settlement agreement as well as the overall MCP process. And I think that's our last slide, so we can open it up for questions.
Thank you. Ms. Ganslick?
Hey, I do have a couple of questions for you. You indicated that you have a whole bunch of new soil borings and a bunch of new monitoring well samples. When will the results of those samples be available for the panel to look at?
So all of those results are in that comprehensive site assessment report.
Oh, okay, so they're already in
that phase 2 report.
Excellent. My second question is, you mentioned PFAS.
Yes.
How does the level of the PFAS that are on site compare with the amount of PFAS there is in Plymouth drinking water?
So we ended up actually, if you look at the town publishes the PFAS data on their website, the Plymouth Water Division, and we also took samples directly from taps at the actual industrial parcel. So the numbers that we have in groundwater are higher than what are coming in from the town of Plymouth or what Plymouth is reporting on their website. But there are a number of fire water lines at the site. There's been a history of fire water testing. So when we see very low levels of PFAS in groundwater at this site, it could be associated with town water. When we see the numbers that we had identified in red, there's something that's specific that's kind of driving those PFAS concentrations. And, operation of a nuclear power plant does not result in the production of PFAS chemicals or does not require use of PFAS chemicals to generate that electricity or transmit that electricity. And again, with no history of aqueous firefighting foam activities at the site, where we're kind of thinking through here is that there's a lot of research on PFAS going right now, really across the globe. And what people are seeing is that there's no shortage of consumer products, materials that are manufactured that have PFAS in them. And at this site, there's a lot of buried electrical cables, buried communication cables that were designed to be in the ground for 40 plus years. And those cables all have plastic wrappings on the outside of them to prevent heat or corrosion. And so it's not unlikely that a lot of that buried material that was part of products to safeguard the plant and allow the safe operation of the plant may be built with PFAS that's ultimately leaching out to the water table.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And thank you. Just for clarity for folks from home or in the audience that are concerned about the drinking water in Plymouth, one of the select board's many duties is being water commissioners. So although there are trace contents of PFAS in the drinking water in this community as well as many other communities, we have a sole source aquifer. It is not contaminated with PFAS. Neither does the airport or the fire department, the Plymouth Fire Department, use PFAS in fire protection, which is a common source, as was alluded to taking out or treating a fire or dealing with a fire. Airports often use them. Neither the airport nor the fire department uses them, just for viewers at home that may be concerned about that. Mrs. Lampert.
Yes, I have a couple of questions. You started out by talking about 8 underground tanks, and I gather they had oil. My question is, in monitoring for the tanks, are you also monitoring for the feeders that from the tank to?
Yes. Yeah, so there's all of those decommissioning activities, the removal of those tanks, as well as the lines that kind of go from those tanks into the buildings or wherever that fuel or diesel was being used. That's all was removed, and that's all documented in those reports that's in
I
that.
understand that they've been removed, but for soil sampling and testing, whether there was leaks from the feeders, are you testing for that in addition to leaks potentially from the tanks themselves?
So when they remove the tanks from the ground, you have a visual and the ability to assess the sidewalls and the bottom underneath where the tank was. It's essentially, they call it a tank grave. And so at that time, there's field meters that's used to assess if there's any contamination in the soil. There's visual assessment. Fuel oils and diesels usually give a pretty strong odor. So there is testing that's completed. And then again, we have a lot of monitoring wells around where all of these tanks were historically. And those monitoring wells have been sampled for fuels, petroleums, and groundwater. And there's no detections in those water samples. So based on the lack of observations of petroleum, diesel, fuel oil in the tank graves, as well as the lack of petroleum detections in groundwater in the nearby monitoring wells, the lines of evidence suggest that the tanks have not been historic releases to the environment.
Or the feeders?
Correct.
For PFAS, it seems to be a large assumption that it's associated with fire equipment materials. What about the use of fertilizers? I know it's not landscaping special around the plant, but there certainly is a lot of grass and mulch and that sort of stuff, which has been a big issue, fertilizers.
Right. I'd have to look specifically at, where they have mulched, where they have put landscaping down. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. To the south of the site, that's all, most of these wells are in asphalt, if not all of them. So there's really not much vegetation and landscaping over where those monitoring wells are detecting PFAS.
Certainly, but the slope of the land would mean if the landscaping was up gradient, it would go down potentially to the wells. Who knows? What standard are you using for PFAS? Because we know the standards may be changing. So what year standard are you adhering to, whether there is a problem with the PFAS or there isn't?
So we're using, for a laboratory technique, we're using an analytical method 1633, which is what EPA and DEP would be looking for in 2024, 2025 timeframe. If you look historically, there was other analytical methods that would give you less number of PFAS actually analyzed in those water samples. So we're using the most up-to-date analytical technique for PFAS, and we're comparing them to the existing Massachusetts DEP regulatory standards for the three different criteria that they have in the state, which is GW1, GW being groundwater standard for 1, and that's the sum of 6 PFAS, which would add to 20 nanograms per liter, that summation.
So if that is changed between now and when the site is released, will that be the standard, or will the standard change, a standard of acceptability change as the time of site release happens?
So if DEP changes the standard, they will provide guidance to the industry, such as this site, as far as how to move from an older standard to that new standard, whether they speak the same language or whether there's steps that need to be involved. They would dictate that process.
So it could be flexible. My last question, because PFAS is a forever chemical, and in talking about drinking water standards, we know that Pilgrim rests upon the second largest aquifer in the state, and we also know there are private wells in properties that are on the periphery. So how are you adjusting the drinking water standard in relation to those two facts? In other words, if the PFAS is not removed to a drinking water standard, then you are potentially not being precautionary for off-site wells that would be used for drinking, or potentially over a period of time dealing with a forever chemical that it could leach down to the aquifer that may be used in the future for drinking water. That's my issue.
Yeah. So those are aspects that we're going to have to work into this next MCP report that we talked about. So we're still going through characterization, understanding what's out there as far as what the final disposition of that PFAS is. That's something that will be part of that phase 3 report, that phase 4 report, and that ultimate risk characterization that I talked about.
Okay, look, thanks a lot.
Mr. Gottlieb?
Yes. Early on, you talked about the licensed TSCA disposal sites. Do you know where these materials are going to be disposed of ultimately?
So the EPA publishes a list of TSCA landfills. We haven't identified the specific one that it has to go to, but it has to go to a TSCA landfill because the fact that we do not know the source of the PCBs that are in those soil piles.
How's that then transported to those locations?
That'll be a truck. That'll basically be a truck, multiple trucks.
And are there any in Massachusetts? You're going to have to travel far afield.
I'd be surprised if there's any in Massachusetts that are open. It's likely going to have to be New England. But again, we're still in the evaluation stage. What we know is it has to go to a TSCA landfill, though.
And what goes into making your determination about where it goes, which one of the ones you choose?
So each landfill, if they want to be certified as a TSCA landfill, they have to get all of their regulations, and they got to get their approvals through EPA. They have their own process through EPA. And then what HDI would do is essentially hire a transportation company to move that soil from that Para 3 property to one of those landfills that's regulated by EPA and has a compliant EPA TSCA landfill.
Okay, not for you, but I guess for HDI, is social justice going to be a criterion determining which trucking landfill you go to?
It would.
Well, good. It's good to be consistent. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Lampert?
Just a quick question. This report was dated in April?
Yes, April 21st, 2025.
Did you send a copy of that to this panel?
Yeah, Dave talked about it earlier on tonight's call.
It's too large to send. I will post it to the HDI decommissioning webpage.
Because obviously DEP, as far as I know, never bothered to send us any information about it. I don't think anyone on this panel, with the possible exception of the chair, has seen any of the slides before tonight. And that puts me, and I would hope a number of the other panel members, in the uncomfortable position of, frankly, not being, I learned it was taught years and years ago to always listen to what you're not being told. And we've seen several examples tonight, and I expect we'll see more as we go forward, of situations in which we simply don't get the information, such as this report, in sufficient time to take a look at it and figure out what questions are left open. Can you do anything to help us going forward on that, to get us the information earlier, before we get another presentation like this, that frankly won't have the report in it?
That's my responsibility. I'll make sure that any of the reports that are made to the state get posted to the webpage.
Good, because not seeing any, never having seen the report and not even seeing the slides at night, and I expect a number of people here are at a serious disadvantage in understanding what is or is not there.
Well, we can certainly follow up and answer questions once you've had the opportunity to review the report.
Please.
Ms. Dubois?
Just a quick question, Matt, if you will. I just want to be sure that I have the location right in my head. Is this on the transmission line on the access road on the west side of Rocky Hill Road?
Is on the west side, the Para 3 PCB?
Yes, yes. Yeah, where the soil is.
Yeah, okay, so it is, if you're coming down, I think it's called Powerhouse Road.
Yep.
It's on the west side of that. There's an actual dirt road that I think is an easement to allow the transmission, the high power attention line company to go out to access their equipment.
Yep.
And so there's a gate currently. I don't know how long that gate has been there for, but you can't get a vehicle through there, that dirt road, unless you have a key to that gate. But it's down that dirt road is where those 6 soil piles are, before you get to the high power attention line, the overhead power lines.
If there's any information out there in the Wanderverse, which I think there must be, because I think I reported this to DEP a very long time ago, can we call you or something?
Sure.
Okay. And am I clear that you're going to remove that soil, but you're not going to do it right away, because you need to do a couple other things first, as well as find a location?
Correct, yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much. And one other thing, in your report, do you have a watershed, a ground watershed boundary there that might help you figure things out?
We do have maps that show the direction of groundwater flow based on monitoring wells on the Para 3 property, as well as monitoring wells on the industrial property.
Awesome.
So it's a map based on facts.
Okay, great. I appreciate it. Thanks very much. And I'm really glad that you pursued this. It's going to answer a lot of things for a lot of people.
Mrs. Lampert?
Yes. I noted that you specified testing for non-radiological, but this is a nuclear power plant. So what about the testing for radiological? Is that part of your report, or is somebody else doing this?
It's being done by the site. It's part of the characterization process of both the licensed property and Para 3.
Holtec is responsible for the radionuclide, and this group is the non-radiological? What are you saying?
That's correct. Under the NRC's jurisdiction, we're responsible for identification, characterization of radiological hazards. We're also responsible for the non-radiological, but through the intervention of the licensed site professional.
And so even though the state has specified in the settlement agreement that the standard should be less than 10, it's up to the licensee to determine compliance? There's no...
It's up to the licensee to determine compliance and the NRC's assessment of performance to the standard. So they'll come in, ORISE will come in, they'll do their own sampling consistent with ours and verify that the license termination plan's consistent with the results.
I think that's an important piece of information. My second question is in parcel 3. There's been a concern about what has been called midnight dumping in parcel 3 of chemical waste in what is called the donut hole. It's called the donut hole because Entergy, one of the employees from Entergy, made a contract, private contract with a tree company to plant trees over where the dumping occurred. The trees died. One can assume perhaps it didn't like the toxic material underneath it. My understanding from the previous report was the only monitoring that was done was east, and because nothing was seen in those monitoring wells, it was declared to be not a problem. However, that was based on the assumption that if packaging was there, it had not ruptured. And so the question, is there stuff there that could rupture 5 years, 10 years, tomorrow, was never answered. So what are you going to do about that?
So we have, there's soil samples and monitoring wells installed in the areas that the linear trees show up on the aerial photographs. And essentially those soil samples and those groundwater samples are indicating no impacts.
Yeah, but what
under the
are you
MCP
going to
process.
do to determine whether currently intact packaging is there? There's been so much information, discussion, parking lot gossip, whatever you want to call it, and threats, actually, to people bringing this up. So it deserves to be looked at.
We've repeatedly asked that if you have any information regarding that you make that available to us. The forester tells us, and the forester has been involved with the property forever, all the plantings have been done based on fire. There's never been any planting associated with any blight or anything else that had killed trees.
Well, it's too bad Jack Priest isn't here because he had discussed it with us. Are you here, Jack?
Mr.
I'm
Priest.
here. And I agree with David, you know, we need to have, we can't act on parking lot rumors or hearsay. I'd default to the forester that's been associated with that property to give us the assessment of what was found on the ground or what the history is. And if there's a legitimate concern about something else, then those facts need to be evaluated and assessed.
And it's called a shovel. Someone could dig down and put the subject to sleep.
How do you decide where to dig?
Where the donut hole is. It's called Google.
I mean, I've looked at aerial photos. I've
Aerial
walked the
photos.
area down. There isn't any area other than the 6 PCB piles that I would even identify as disturbed soil. So I don't know where we would dig. If you have information, please bring it forward. We'll do whatever we have to do to investigate it. We want to make sure that if there's something there that we identify and we take care of it.
I can discuss it privately because there were serious threats to people who brought it forward. Serious threats.
Other questions from panel members? All right, hearing and seeing none, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, that being the decommissioning fund update.
So HDI submitted its annual trust fund evaluation report that was submitted on March 31st. The decommissioning trust fund value effective December 31st of 2024 is $484.7 million in the decommissioning trust fund as of that date. There have been no material changes associated with the milestones over the report that had been made in 2023, and assumptions regarding the rates of escalation for the decommissioning trust fund assumes a 2% real rate of return each year in accordance with the requirements that are in the NRC regulation, 10 CFR 50.75. The remaining project cost that is spelled out in that report totals $557 million. Of that, $212 million is license termination cost, $330 million spent fuel management, and $15 million for site restoration. The current schedule has major decommissioning and partial site release completed in 2035, with a remaining decommissioning trust fund balance of $246.9 million. Spent fuel is scheduled to be removed from the site on final site release in 2063. The remaining project cost in accordance with the decommissioning cost estimate, and again assuming a 2% real rate of return each year for 2025 through 2063, will have a remainder of $75.3 million in the fund when the NRC license terminates in 2063. So it meets the requirements for the NRC for solvency of the fund. And with respect to the considerations that were established in the state agreement, the value prior to partial site release had to be projected to be at least $193.3 million at the point of partial site release in 2035. And again, the value of the fund was determined to be $246.9 million at that time. And after partial site release, the project has fuel management costs, and those fuel management costs result in a triggering event for Holtec to make up the difference if the amount of money that is available in the fund drops below the minimum required for safe fuel management between 2035 and 2063, and we do not meet those triggers. So with respect to the solvency of the fund, we verified that we, through accepted accounting practices, that there's adequate money available to complete the decommissioning of the plant through partial site release and then continuation on to to fuel management through the end of the current license in 2063 with margin. So we meet all of the requirements of both the federal requirements and those that the state saw fit to include in the state agreement that was signed between Holtec, HDI, and the Commonwealth. That's what I have pending questions. With respect to the chairman's question from the last meeting about providing a figure regarding legal costs that have been paid out of the trust fund, we are not going to make that public. We are going to provide assurance that we meet all the requirements for a solvent decommissioning trust fund. Holtec is a privately traded company, and we will assure through our federal filings and reports that we make to this committee that there's adequate funds available to be able to complete the work that we have to do.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the panel?
Quite obviously.
Mr. Lampert?
The report, I believe it's entitled, your Annual Decommissioning Funding and Spent Fuel Management Status and Financial Assurance Report. Is that it?
That's it.
Did you provide that to this panel?
Can I provide it to
Did
this?
you?
I did not provide it to this panel, no.
Another example of what I was talking about earlier tonight. Another question. You basically, if you look at the fund balance, presently 484.7, and I did find the report this morning, so I'm reading from it. Do you have a copy?
I don't have a copy with me, no.
There is a gap of about $75 million between what is now in the fund and the projected, and I use the word advisedly, projected cost going forward. The one number is 484.7 million, the other is 557 million.
And that's accounted for in the 2% growth of the fund over time.
So that is accounted for. But what about the estimated costs? When you filed your original PSDAR, you estimated the costs in 2019 dollars and did not provide for any inflation. Over the years, you have had to adjust those costs to account for inflation. Do you recall what adjustments you've made at what amount of inflation?
I don't know what figure that we've put with respect to inflation for costs. I do know that these are accurate. This is accurate data as of the filing.
But it's accurate data. I believe, and I did not have time to go back and check the prior reports, that the inflation was fairly close to the increase in the decommissioning trust fund, that they were allowed to account for the 2%. Obviously, the decommissioning trust fund does not have a constant rate of return. It's had a good rate of return, and as we all know from our own 401ks, it's had some disastrous rates of return in the stock market. But on what basis do you assume that the costs of decommissioning will not increase with inflation?
We continually assess those costs based on the work that we have ahead of us, labor rates, what we expect it's going to take to perform those work activities based on what it's costing other people to do similar activities.
Then why are those adjustments for expected inflation not reflected in the costs in the paper you file?
They are.
No, sir, they're not.
Yes,
they are.
They
All. I'm sorry. What those says is these are all constant in 2024 dollars. That does not account for inflation.
They are normalized to the baseline figure, but they account for the cost to actually perform the work in the current market.
Well, let me just give you an example, and I'm looking at spent fuel management costs. Spent fuel management costs, you estimate in 2036 will be $8.2 million. That number does not change to 2063. Is your estimate saying there will be no increase in spent fuel managing costs over 30 years?
That is the assessment of what it's going to take to continue to maintain that spent fuel management cost.
Do you honestly expect there will be no inflation in spent fuel management costs between 2036 and 2063?
That's the assessment of providing adequate money to be able to complete that.
So that was whole text assessment, and I assume it's what the NRC requires you to tell them. I'm glad I don't do my accounting that way. One other question. In 2063, you show no spent fuel management costs after that date. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Where does it go?
That makes the assumption that everything will be off-site by 2063. Am I correct?
It does.
What if it is not? Who pays where's the money?
The fund still has a value of $75 million at that point.
And what if the fund has $75 million in 2063, where is that $75.3 million going to go? Into Holtec profit?
If the fuel still needs to be maintained?
Yes.
The fuel will be maintained. The cost, Holtec will do what it has to do to maintain custodial responsibility of the fuel.
So can I take that as a commitment by Holtec that it will pay whatever spent fuel management costs are incurred between now and the date that the last of the fuel actually leaves the site?
I'm sure that that is going to be something that's going to be subject to litigation. I can't make that statement here.
So Holtec, if you're standing here, Holtec will not commit to paying, and I know you'll recover it eventually, but Holtec will not commit to paying spent fuel management costs after 2063. Is that correct?
I can't make that commitment.
Fine.
Other questions from members of the panel? Mr. Gottlieb.
Just want to go back and, Dave, you said the future cost, the cost estimates going forward were based on today's cost of others doing like and similar activities, right?
That's correct.
Is that another way of saying that you're holding those costs fixed at today's current rate?
No, it means we're continuously evaluating them because based on technology, those costs can go up or down. And we're assessing what it would take to perform that work, best estimate in the window that it's currently scheduled.
But that's based on current competitor or current costs from others. How is that adjusted for future changes up or down on technology improvements or any other factors? Or is it just a spaceholder based on what you estimated to be today in today's dollars and you'll change it later depending on what happens?
No, it's based on the best information available of what it's going to take to do that work when it is scheduled. So if there's any intelligence that would indicate that it's going to be more or less, that is applied to that figure.
And what is the intelligence about a future base rate of inflation going forward?
I don't know. We have individuals with Holtec that make those financial projections, just like any other business.
Okay, but maybe you can appreciate it, maybe you can't. It's a fundamental factor at a baseline that this committee, I think, or at least some on the committee, think is a reasonable thing to be able to articulate. I mean, it's not, I'm not asking you to project what the technology changes might be. It's a simple rate of inflation that gets factored into a formula, and you can't tell us that. So how are we supposed to evaluate for our own, other than on a trust me basis, whether these assertions about long-term solvency of this fund are valid?
I would trust the fact that the state determined that the assurance that it needed was to receive copies of the financial report using proven industry practices to assess what it's going to take to complete the job, getting copies of that report and verifying that using those accounting practices that there is going to be adequate monies available both at partial site release and through spent fuel management at 2063. That is the assurances that the state needed. I think that should be sufficient for this committee.
So that you're saying that the state has signed off on this financial report?
The state determined what level of assurance it needed. The level of assurance that it needed through the state agreement was to receive this report. They didn't request, the state did not request independent audits. They did not request anything outside of the NRC's process to verify that there was going to be adequate money left for decommissioning. The state felt comfortable or comfortable enough to sign off on the agreement.
But this report reports a conclusion without revealing the assumptions that go into it. So the state's signing off on it because the NRC apparently says okay, but nobody knows what the assumptions are other than you and the NRC knows what the assumptions are that resulted in you're saying you met the standard. For all we know, you just backed into it. And your assumptions about inflation are a function of mathematics to make the equation come out right, so you can say everybody's good without any realistic, connection to reality. So, this is a continual and repetitive shortcoming in this presentation. A fundamental question about what the assumptions are that go into the report are never provided to us. And maybe the state's okay with it, maybe they aren't. If they are, then I question their judgment, and I don't understand why every year this comes up, we have this conversation. We can't get underneath the most fundamental things that are the basis of making a formula come out the way you want it to come out.
Well, it happens in every business. There are accounting practices that are applied to these kinds of business assessments all the time.
And I think most of the time when you're, in my personal and professional experience, when you say, what do you assume? You talk about what your revenue cost inflator is, and you ask them, well, what's your assessment on the spending side? My general experience is they have an answer. You either don't or you refuse to give it. So sure, there are basic standard parameters. We could argue about those. We don't know what they are. So it's just, this is the outcome of some formula that nobody has any basis to understand. And we're basically told, this is what Holtec came up with, and the NRC said, okay, so that should be good enough for you. Pardon me if it's not good enough for me. And I doubt it's good enough for a lot of other people. It's insulting.
Mr. King? I just asked you.
Any other members of the panel have any questions at this time? Seeing none, Mr. Lampert, you have additional questions.
I basically have a comment and perhaps then a question. My first comment is, Mr. Noyes says several times that the state was satisfied. I question the basis for that, which you have to recognize, and what everybody on the panel should recognize, and anybody who's ever been involved in anything, I think probably does, is this was a negotiated agreement. What is in that agreement is what the state was able to get Holtec to agree to. It is a giant leap from there to say that the state was satisfied with all of the information that Holtec, in its judgment, was willing to give to the state. My comment is, I believe at the last meeting, there was a suggestion, and it may have been by the chair, that Holtec bring in someone who really understands all the financials of where these came from, who can get into the detail of what assumptions did you make, what assumptions did you not, because I think it's quite clear we're not getting that information from anything that's on the paper or anything we've heard tonight.
Mrs. Lampert.
I would also add, there were 2 motions filed opposing the sale, approval of the sale from Entergy to Holtec. One by the Attorney General on behalf of the Commonwealth, and the other by Pilgrim Watch. Both focused on the insufficiency of the funds. You can read both motions online, and the expert testimony, for example, that the Attorney General had, pointing out all the potential problems where they foresaw that there would be insufficient funds. What happened? What happened was, despite the fact that those motions, both by the Commonwealth and by Pilgrim Watch, had yet to be heard by NRC, NRC pulled the end game and approved the sale, despite ongoing motions that had not been heard, saying, well, if you want to go forward anyway, after we have approved it, then do so. Obviously, it would be a waste of time. And so the Commonwealth decided that they would drop their motions, and we did also, and fight the next battle the next day. But to have the public say that the Commonwealth was all smiles and happy is an inaccurate portrayal, and I would advise you to read
Please.
the motions and the expert testimony provided by the Commonwealth.
Please don't put words in my mouth. I didn't say that the state was all smiles. I said that the state approved the agreement because they believed that it gave them adequate financial assurance, or else they wouldn't have signed it.
I was just disagreeing with that conclusion. I didn't think they were smiling. That was just a phrase. Apologize if you thought that's what I thought you said. I was disagreeing with the fact that they approved. They technically put their signature to the paper. Were their concerns, did that indicate their concerns were satisfied? No.
Any other questions from any other panel members at this time? Hearing and seeing none, thank you, Mr. Noyes. That will bring us to the next subject on the agenda, which is the IWG report. Mr. Priest, do we have anything in regards to the IWG report?
I'm not representing the IWG in the meeting. I have nothing to add.
Okay, and we don't currently have a replacement for Mr. Pickering, so we will move forward.
Mr. Chairman, do you know the status of Mr. Pickering's replacement?
I do not. That will bring us to the next segment on the agenda, that being the approval of previous meeting minutes. The prior meeting minutes were the meeting minutes of March 24th, 2025. Does anyone have anything they would like to add, edit, alter, or otherwise change in regards to the March 24th, 2025 meeting minutes? Mrs. Gatzler?
I do have some. Do you want me to go over them? I emailed them to you.
Please.
Okay. So I added page numbers to the document to make it easier. That was my first comment. It's just make sure that we add page numbers to the meeting minutes. On page 2, second bullet, from the top of the page, last sentence should be revised to, she suggests that the board select people from Plymouth. That's in reference to Ms. Lambert's discussion about diversity on the panel. Page 2 in the waterfall chart, the last sentence in the section should be revised.
I don't understand what you were adding in that the second bullet.
I'm sorry.
What were you adding in the second bullet? I just couldn't follow.
When I listened to the meeting the other day going through the minutes, Ms. Lambert suggested that the board select people from Plymouth. It was not accurately reflected in the minutes as written.
As opposed from the Wampanoag tribe, because I...
No, that is included, but she's like more diversity.
I did say that.
There are additional positions on the handicap currently that are unfilled, that the appointment authority is within Plymouth.
Yep. Then on page 2, the waterfall chart, the last sentence in the section, revise the word boards to bores, B-O-R-E-S, because they're those soil bores. Page 2, the outgoing demolition update, first bullet, end of the sentence, just add a period. It has a comma, just replace it with a period. Page 4, the solid radioactive waste shipments, the bullet. Add to the beginning of the first bullet, the RT-100 type B cask was used. It just kind of starts off and doesn't really say what cask it was. On page 4, also the solid radioactive waste bullet, shipment second bullet. I'm not sure, but it said 2 casks, and I think it meant to say this cask is, because I went back and listened to Dave's description on it, and it didn't infer that there was 2 casks there. Here's this cask is. Page 4, follow-up questions for Dave Noyes, first bullet, 8th line. revise the like C-Cans/Connex to like C-Vans, V-A-N-S. They're C-Vans. Then page 6, first bullet, 16th line, it's a typo, brief is misspelled. And then page 12, the proposed future agenda topics, first bullet, it should be phase 2 instead of phase 3. And I sent those, copy of those and the revisions I made to the minutes to you.
Yes, you did.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other additions, edits, or other comments in regards to the minutes? Mrs. Lampert?
Yes, a small one, and I did email it to you in that format.
Yes.
Page 3, fifth bullet under reactor cavity drain down, 400,000 gallons. There should be a comma, not a period after 400.
Okay.
Big
Thank you.
deal, but that's it.
All right. Mr. Lampert?
Probably even more minute, very last line of the last page says that I made a motion to adjourn, Ms. Gatlick seconded. I think it's worth noting that the motion passed, or we'd still be here.
Okay. Thank you. So we will update the, I will seek a motion to update the inclusion that a motion passed to adjourn the last meeting at the end. Anything else anyone would like to add, edit, alter, or otherwise change before I solicit a motion to approve the minutes? All right. Mr. Noyes, would you care to make a motion that we approve the meeting minutes with the edits that have been suggested by the members of the panel?
So moved.
Has been moved. Mr. O'Brien, would you care to second? Has been seconded. Any discussion from members of the panel about whether or not we should approve the proposed meeting minutes with those edits and additions? Hearing and seeing none, I will go through the roll. Mr. Noyes?
Approved.
Thank you. Mr. McDonough?
I'd abstain.
Mr. O'Brien?
Approve.
Ms. Dubois?
Approve.
Mr. Fortini?
Approved.
Ms. Gatzlick?
Approved.
Mr. Lampert?
Aye.
Mrs. Lampert?
Approved.
Mr. Priest?
Approved.
Ms. Castle?
Abstain.
Mr. Wade?
Approve.
Mr. Callahan?
Approve.
Mr. Gottlieb?
Approved.
Ms. Waldron?
Approved.
And myself, yes. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have 13 yes and 2 abstentions. So the motion passes. We have approved the meeting minutes of March 24th, 2025 with those edits and additions. That brings us to everybody's favorite, public questions and comments. So we will now move on to the public questions and comments section of the meeting. The panel has allotted 30 minutes on our agenda for the purpose of public questions and comments. During this section of our agenda, any member of the public may make a statement or ask questions of members of the panel. Each speaker during this segment will be given up to 5 minutes to make their statement or ask questions. This speaking time will include both the statements of the speaker and the time panel members spend answering any questions that are posed to them. If a speaker exceeds their 5 minutes of speaking time and wishes to speak for additional time, they will be offered up to an additional minute to finish speaking, or if they want more than an additional minute, they can ask the panel for their desired amount of time, but speakers are reminded that pursuant to our enabling statute, such a request will require a majority vote of the entire membership of the panel in order to succeed. Once 30 minutes have elapsed, the panel will not invite further speakers to speak. However, any speaker that has already started speaking prior to the 30-minute mark will be given the same speaking time and opportunities afforded to prior speakers to make their statements or get answers to their questions. And with that, we have a queue started. Elaine Dickinson. Green light? Is the green light lit up?
Push, got it. Okay.
Thank you.
At the last NDCAP in March, I requested that you, the NDCAP panel, advise the governor to enforce the state environmental laws and regulations concerning Holtec's illegal radioactive airborne pollution discharge as an alternative to dumping directly into the bay. Considering the town of Plymouth's election just this past Saturday, where 86.8% of the people in this town directed the town government to communicate with the governor, the Attorney General, the state legislature, and all other relevant authorities to employ all means available to ensure that the law is enforced, and to ensure further that Holtec immediately ceased the gaseous discharge of the radioactively and chemically contaminated industrial wastewater. I ask that this be put in the written report and follow through for all of us who are watching, especially considering this overwhelming vote in this town of 86.8% in favor of direct communication with the governor. Many of you are appointed by people in the legislation, or by the governor, or by the Attorney General, or by the town select board, and so forth. I asked for that last time, 2 months ago. Has there been a reply? Did it get reported?
The panel reports to the governor on an annual basis. Any comments that are made in the meeting minutes or submitted online are submitted in that regard and included in those annual reports. So your comments from last time and this time will be in there.
In the annual report?
Correct. However, in regards to question 2, that was in the town-wide ballot, that was directed not towards the NDCAP, but towards the government of the town of Plymouth. And just for members of the public that may not be aware of what question 2 was, it was a non-binding citizens petition by Save Our Bay Coalition that was put on the town-wide ballot. Plymouth just had its election last Saturday. As the speaker said, the time for, the quantum of vote was overwhelmingly in support. It was 6,938 voted yes, 638 voted no on a question as to whether members of the electorate wanted to support the town government communicating with elected officials and state agencies concerning Holtec and the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station in Plymouth in regards to communicating with the governor, attorney general, state legislature, and any other relevant authorities to employ all means available to ensure that the law is enforced and ensure further that Holtec immediately cease the gaseous discharge of the radioactively and chemically contaminated industrial water at Pilgrim. So the town of Plymouth continues to have regular, we don't speak to the governor as often as we would like, to be honest. We do speak to members of our state delegation very commonly and very frequently, as well as when relevant to regulatory agencies. And when needed, we do speak to the Attorney General's office. We have been doing that consistently throughout the process. We will continue to do that as issues come along. But we certainly, the town of Plymouth takes very seriously the health and safety of our residents, our visitors, and our surrounding communities as well. We realize that while we are the host community to the power station, that we also have a responsibility to the general area as well for what happens there. So we have and will continue to do so. We also recognize certainly the overwhelming support of our electorate in terms of wanting us to do so. So we will continue to do that. So we, the town, are not dependent on this annual report structure. As I said, we don't get to talk to the governor as much as I would like, but when we have the opportunity to talk to any of those listed or any other relevant state or federal, we have had meetings with the NRC before too. We will continue to do that.
But just the fact that the vote was so overwhelming that it should send a message to each one of you individually of how the people here feel. Never mind about all the other towns that are also voting, but just this town that hosts the plant. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Dickinson. All right, and our next speaker, please come to the mic, Mr. Campbell.
I'd just like to make some comments. My name is Brian Campbell, retired electrical engineer, and I strongly support discharging treated water from Pilgrim Nuclear Station into Cape Cod Bay. I've reported after dilution, 80 gallons, if you swallowed it, would be equal to the radiation dose received in one banana. In March of 2023, Mr. Noyes reported that the total tritium stored in approximately 900,000 gallons is about 12 curies, or equal to 2 exit signs. That's the amount of tritium in 2 exit signs. But I did a Google AI and did the calculations over again. There are over 2 million of these tritium exit signs throughout the United States. They are easy to buy online. They're under $300. The amount of tritium that I calculated was about 1/2 the amount that's still in the water. So 1/2 of one of those is all in that 900,000 gallons. That's how much tritium is in there. The presentations by Holtec to this panel shows Holtec to be a good corporate citizen, performing the Pilgrim decommissioning in a truthful and open manner that should be commended. In the 2022 article, PowerMag.com magazine by Paul Miller, the article entitled Accelerated Decommissioning of Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station, a progress report, reports the social value in accelerated decommissioning will benefit the town of Plymouth by enabling the revenues, the bulk of the 1,600-acre property to be repurposed, helping to replace the lost revenues of the tax base from the plant shutdown. The article reports a 2027 return of these 1,600 acres to the town of Plymouth for development would offset this. This would have somewhat compensated Plymouth for losing 600 high-paying jobs whose annual payroll was $77 million, including benefits, $9.8 million in state and local taxes annually, and approximately 10% of Plymouth's total tax revenue. That's what this power plant contributed to Plymouth, Massachusetts. The Commonwealth and this panel have done everything possible to sabotage accelerated decommissioning by delaying the discharge of the treated safe water into Cape Cod Bay, which has been done safely since 1972 with no harm to anything. In 2021, Undersecretary of Climate Change, David Ismay, saying that 60% of the state's emissions come from you, the person in the street, the senior on a fixed income. There is no bad guy left, at least in Massachusetts, to point the finger at, to turn the screws on, to break their will so they will stop emitting. He said in a video, that's you. We have to break your will, right? I can't even say that publicly. That's right, Mr. Inlay. That's why you're fired. That's how the Commonwealth deals with truth tellers. The Commonwealth, by unplugging Industrial Cathedral, Pilgrim Nuclear, shows it is run by industrial-scale vandals intent on impoverishing Massachusetts tax and ratepayers. The 2050 net zero plans with corrupt mass save and adoption of unreliable, expensive wind, solar, and battery woke electric grid is a disaster. And my electrical bill was 35 cents a kilowatt hour. In Tennessee, it's 12 cents. But they got more nuclear. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. The next speaker, please come to the microphone and introduce yourself.
Yes. My name's Sean Noyes, no relation to David Noyes. I live in East Dennis on the Bay. I did have something to cover, but I'd you guys brought up some very good questions. one of the things I looked up, and I was interested in hearing from you folks, is that towards the end, 2061, 2062, and the funds that were supposed to be put out there for Holtec, or by Holtec in that fund, my understanding is that utilities are suing the federal government over nuclear spent fuel because the government failed to provide the permanent disposal site as required by law. These lawsuits have been based on breach of contract claims, arguing the government breached its obligations to accept and dispose of the spent fuel. The lawsuits seek to recover the costs utilities have incurred for storing the fuel on site. So I think it's well north of $1 billion right now. Would we, Mr. Lampert, maybe you could enlighten me on that?
Mr. Lampert?
Or
would you
Mr.
care?
Noyes?
You're clearly correct in terms of lawsuits. The government, back in what year? When was this agreement?
I think it's 2013?
No, it was much earlier than that, back in the late 90s.
1998.
1998, the government signed an agreement in which it promised to remove all of the spent nuclear fuel from, I believe, all of the commercial reactors in the country. The probable hope at that stage was that Yucca Mountain would be a reality. We all know it has, or someplace, but it was the only one that was getting any attention.
Okay.
Obviously, Yucca is now off the table. No fuel has been moved off-site into there, and as of the moment, there are no off-site of any significance interim storage sites. The utility companies have regularly sued the government to recover the funds that have been expended for spent fuel management. They typically bring a suit roughly every 5 years because that's the period of the statute of limitations. They have to have spent the money first and then sue to get it back.
Okay.
That's the key.
That's the key.
Okay.
I don't know, and maybe Dave Noyes or McDonough can inform me, Energy has brought suits for what it spent prior to the sale. I don't know whether Holtec has actually brought a suit yet. Do you, Dave?
Holtec has brought suit.
Holtec has brought a suit. You
Yes.
know for what period?
I do not.
So it's brought a suit, and presumably as the time rolls on, it will bring more suits.
Question, what happened to that money? Who'd it go to?
We have not gotten
There's no
any
recovery.
money from those suits yet.
Yep. Basically, the industry regularly wins these suits. It's gotten almost to a point of a laydown win, perhaps not for all the money that the utility is after, but I think it's fair to say for the lion's share. But that's the structure on this. You spend the money, you then sue to get it back. So far, all the money that Holtec has spent, unless I'm misinformed, for spent fuel management has come out of the Decommissioning Trust Fund that, if you go back and look at Holtec's PSDR, allocated approximately $500 million to spent fuel management. The important thing to remember on the Decommissioning Trust Fund is that, to the best of my knowledge, no licensee, Pilgrim's, ever put a cent into it. That fund is a result of monies that were collected from ratepayers back in the early 1970s, and has simply been growing ever since. One of the questions that obviously is important after these monies are recovered is, where is the recovery going to go? Will it go to Holtec, or will it be returned to the people who basically put the money into the fund in the first place?
That's a good question.
And I don't know the answer to that.
So that's why I was listening to the discussion, that it had some merit, but I was also in the back of my head, I'm very aware that these lawsuits occur. I'm aware, rough order of magnitude, what federal government's paying for it year over year. One of the reasons why I actually do like Holtec is they were looking to put the interim storage, which I think is the appropriate place for it to be. You may disagree, respect, you have a different opinion. Okay, I think it belongs in interim storage in New Mexico.
You have reached 5 minutes. Do you want an additional minute to conclude your remarks, or would you seek further time than that by an affirmative vote of a majority of the panel.
I'll just take 1 minute.
Okay.
So, on non-radiological, I'm going to compliment everyone tonight. The state officials, the panel, you were very civilized. For the life of me, when we come to radiological materials, it takes my breath away because I do not feel it's about science. I would love to debate you at some point. So just want to commend everyone around the presentation. I thought Holtec did a great job. When I see stuff like PFAS, all of us have pause. I've had a friend who had cancer on it. I'm pleased to see the remediation. I'm pleased to see everybody take it seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker, please take the mic. Kyle Gatzlick.
What is it?
Mr. Gatzlick, you may... You have
It's
the
still
microphone.
Andrew Jacobs.
Mr. Gatzlick, you may speak if you would like.
I have just like 2 quick ones and then a question on the PFAS, because terrifying stuff. They had mentioned that they were looking for disposal in a, I don't remember the word they called it for the site in New England. It's like, starts with the, I want to call it like Ceradon. I didn't quite hear it correctly.
It's, the Tosca facility has to do with the PCBs, not PFAS.
All right. And then the other one was, its WIPS was shut down in the early 90s and Yucca was 2012. And then the other one was, I wanted to make sure this was covered correctly. It was only a 6% vote for the town of Plymouth for item 2. So that was not 86% of the population, just 6%.
I believe the speaker was referring to the quantum of vote by the 7,992 people that showed up to the polls on Saturday, not the total registered voters of the community.
All right, awesome.
One quick question, did you say WIP was closed? WIPs was shut down in 98 because no.
All right, you can, thank you, but if we could have the next speaker who wishes to speak, please take the microphone.
Good evening. My name's Joanne Wilson Keenan, and I'm also from East Dennis by the Bay. Mr. Canty, I have a question for you that follows up on Mrs. Dickerson's talk earlier. Could you clarify for me, and maybe you can't because this is ENDCAP and not a town meeting, the role of the town clerk in certifying that vote the other day, and does the town clerk send the information forward to the governor and the attorney general in the non-binding question?
Well, so the question was about whether town officials should communicate with
the governor,
with
the attorney general.
the given and enumerated state actors and agencies.
Mm-hmm.
So the town clerk runs the election, certifies the results, send
Right.
those as relevant to the Secretary of the Commonwealth in regards to the election. The town clerk would not be charged with communicating with the governor or the state legislature or anything like that. It would be through your select board here, the town manager, the Department of Public Health here, those actors and entities would be the individuals communicating with the state delegation and the state executive branch officials and agencies.
And that happens as a formal procedure?
Well, it happens as part of the ordinary conduct of business within the community and about the community. So sometimes we have planned meetings with our state delegation, for example. Sometimes we just see them at events and talk to them about certain things. We also, I know, like, we have their contact information that we can reach out to them. I do not have the direct contact information for Maura Healy, unfortunately. The select board does have a meeting with the governor about general topics. We only have an hour with her on June 11th. So that's where only a couple of us can go due to the open meeting law and things of that nature. But there are various channels and methods in which we communicate with state actors and agencies as relevant.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Mrs. Lambert, you have something to add about the town of Plymouth's communications with the state agencies and actors?
No, but what I was going to add It depends on the wording of the resolution. In Duxbury, which passed overwhelmingly on the same subject, we did state specifically that the town clerk shall send and contact to various parties.
Okay.
I was just pointing out that it depended on the wording.
Okay. Appreciate that. Thank you. Any other members of the public that are in the room wishing to speak? I know we have someone on Zoom, at least one. All right. Hearing and seeing none, I will go to Zoom, and it is Rosemary Shields. Your digital hand is raised. If you could, you'll be invited to take a position as a panelist on the Zoom, and if you could unmute yourself so we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, great. Hi. The reason I'm getting on here is I noticed the next item on the agenda is the discussion on proposals from panel members regarding adding items to future agendas. And that was actually my question, because I know, 2 meetings ago, Jack Priest took a bunch of topics, and he was going to check with the state agencies to see if they would be something that the state agencies would like to see on the agenda. And I was just wondering, is that what's going to happen next?
So what was explained at the last meeting by Mr. Priest was that the members of the panel that are representatives of state agencies would need to run the proposed agenda items up the chain, so to speak, at their relevant agency before they felt comfortable voting yes or no on a given item, and that they would otherwise abstain. Given the enabling statute that sets that in order to take an action, this panel must have a majority, not just of members present, but of total membership vote in the affirmative. That makes the quantum of vote very high for something to succeed. So functionally, those abstentions would prevent a vote from going forward. So it was decided by the panel and by the chair that we would present items, give the state agency actors an opportunity to go to their agencies and run those things up the chain, and then we would actually have votes on those items at subsequent meetings after that opportunity was afforded to them. So part 2 of proposed items from last time would happen now, and part 1 of proposed items for next time would happen now. Well, by now I mean after the public comment section.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome. Any other members of the public on Zoom that wish to speak? And anyone else in the room? All right, hearing and seeing none, we will move on to that next section of the agenda. So as was just stated by myself, at the last meeting, we discussed some items that individual panel members or multiple panel members would like to potentially see as agenda items on future NDCAP agendas. It wouldn't necessarily mean it'd be the next meeting that they'd be on, but they could be on a future agenda when there was an opportunity for the presentation or presenters to appear, and as well as availability on agenda in terms of balancing an agenda and not putting too much on a given evening. So in terms of items that were talked about last time, there was a request for someone from Mass DEP to speak in regards to the status of the Attorney General Office's review of Holtec's environmental plan. There was a request to review the treatment process for water versus what is being released from the stack. There was a request, I believe, from Mrs. Lampert in regards to dry cask and spent fuel storage, and I know Mrs. Lampert submitted to me, and I forwarded to panel members some documentation in regards to the specifics of that request that panel members should have. There was a request by, I believe, Mr. Lampert to review our voting structure. I believe that was in regards to potentially seeking to amend the enabling statute of the handicap, given, as I just said, it requires not just a majority of those present and voting, but entire membership, even including vacant positions, which is unusual, in order for something to be affirmatively voted on and pass. There was a mention of the CLAP report, DPH data and conclusions for independent review. So those are the items that we talked about last time. Does anyone would anyone like to make a motion to put any of these to a vote for review?
It may be under the area of point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
This is, as I'm hearing it, a major change in the way the agendas have been set. Through the years that this panel has been in existence, until the previous meeting, my understanding is that the chair, and I know I did, prepared an agenda of subjects that the chair deemed sufficiently important to include for discussion at the next meeting. My recollection of Robert's rules is that's the starting point, and the panel can decide not to talk about those, but I believe it is still the chair's prerogative to put together an agenda and circulate it. And what I don't understand is why we are apparently now changing that and not putting anything onto the agenda that might be suggested, and I suggested things to previous chairs over the years, unless there is an affirmative vote, which, as was demonstrated in the last meeting and giving our voting structure, is almost doomed to failure. I just don't understand why we are changing the procedure to that as opposed to the chair proposing important subjects and deal.
Sure, I'd be happy to answer that. You may recall when you were still acting as acting chair that there was an agenda item about this very topic, and a vote was taken at the January meeting to establish this process and procedure prior to me being elected to the position of chair. So that is why the panel has made a decision that putting items on a future agenda outside of the specifically enumerated things that are in our enabling statute, which were put on this agenda tonight about the decommissioning fund, and things that we regularly receive, like the Holtec report and, when applicable, the IWG report, that the panel wanted input on what was put on the agenda. So while, yes, Robert's Rules of Order by default permits the chair to do that unilaterally, this panel made a decision, a majority of total membership, that this would be the procedure for establishing future agenda topics.
Just my obvious basic fear of this is I think the result is going to be that nothing of significance will be added to any agenda.
Well, Ms. Dubois?
Yeah, I'd like to add something significant to the thoughts.
Okay.
Let's talk about spent nuclear fuel and figure out how long we're going to want to see it on the Hill, and try and figure out how to get a coordinated effort together to deal with the New England nuclear waste dump and figure out how to treat it more rationally and environmentally safely and environmentally justly as well. I think it's a huge topic. I don't think we know what the rest of the world is doing. I don't think we can rely on interim consent-based siting and all that kind of stuff. And I think we need to put our brains together because, after all, we created it and we have a responsibility to solve the damn problem.
Was that separate from and unique from the dry cask and spent fuel storage integrity item that Mrs. Lampert suggested last time?
I think it's a little broader than that. You're mischaracterizing
what we said.
what I said.
You will have an opportunity if someone makes a motion to elaborate on what you said. I was asking Ms. Dubois whether she was, based on what she received in the email from which included your documentation about what you wanted to cover, if she believed it was covered within that, because then, presumably, based on our state agency representatives, we could potentially act on that tonight, versus if it's unique from that, separate from that, we would require, based on the state agency representatives' abstentions on a first pass, to take it up at the next meeting. So that's why I was seeking clarification as to that.
So to answer your question, when I was involved in a nationwide group conversation about spent nuclear fuel. I'm not quite sure what happened with that, but I think there was an agreement about it to go to Congress and try and get regulations passed. I also took steps when Senator Pacheco was in the legislature, because he was part of the Council on State Governments for the New England region. He was head of Energy and Environment. I asked him, can you help us figure out how to deal with the spent nuclear fuel, because it's not a good idea to just leave it on the hill forever and exposed that way. Sea level is rising. It's not great. It's going to take us a long time. Can we get a bigger group of minds thinking about it, and we can participate too? Because quite frankly, I think we need a better solution than sending it to a earthquake-prone Permian Basin. And I think that there are options out there if we would look at what the rest of the world is doing and start having a broader conversation and get out of our own hang-up about 800,000 gallons of water, because it's taking up all our energy. We're wasting a lot of time, and we're wasting a lot of trust fund money at the same time. So I think we need to get to work, and I think the spent nuclear fuel is part of that work, and we should get on it.
So I would take that is a separate topic. Would that be separate from what Mrs. Lambert was saying?
I don't think it's entirely separate. I only read her document once, but I thought, it needs to be bigger than just dealing with the casts or just dealing with our own little thing. I think we need to have a world view, because it's a world problem.
Okay. Mr. Chairman. Other people have raised their hands, and I'm going to recognize them. Thank you. Mr. Fortini.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in further carrying on what Pine just talked about, so based on my own experience, I've been in designing nuclear plants around the world and was in charge of the nuclear division in my company. And basic problem here is the United States is so far behind the 8 ball in addressing this whole reprocessing. That's the real problem. I mean, if you go to the UK, if you go to China, if you go to France, EDF, if you go to Finland, all these nuclear plants that are out there, they've already developed all kinds of reprocessing facilities because they've recognized the importance of being able to also use all of these products based on taking these zirconium rods, for example, and crushing them and putting them in acid baths and getting all this depleted uranium and plutonium out of there, which basically is used not only in munitions, but it's also used in fuel for these new SMRs that we're trying to develop. So I really think our resources are better utilized. Why don't we try to get our legislatures in Massachusetts that we have availability to and get them to come down here and explain to us why they're not pushing to have reprocessing plants built in the United States like every other country is doing. I mean, I think we're just so far behind the 8 ball in this, and there's the solution. Pilgrim's not the only place that has depleted rods. They're not the only place that has casts. There's Millstone 100 miles down the street here, where there's 3 nuclear plants, where Unit 1 shut down. They've got all kinds of casts. There's Roe, there's Maine Yankee, there's Vermont Yankee. They all have they all have rods that are just sitting in casks. So anyway, I just think that the main thing here is instead of worrying about with the casts and talking about the design, why don't we get these legislatures down here and explain to us why they aren't doing more to try to get repositories approved in the United States?
Okay, we're going away from talking about what's going to be on a future agenda and actually talking about topics. So let's go back We have this list of things that were brought up last time. I will go through them individually, and if you would like to make a motion that we take a vote as to whether or not to include that particular item on a future agenda, you may do so after I have read it. And we will go through the list, so we'll see what motions we get, take a vote as we go along, and take things from there. And then I will open up this item to items that people would like to see in future agendas that were not discussed last time to begin the next phase one of the two-phase process that we need to go through to put an item on an agenda. So,
Point of order, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Lampert, yes, your
Point of order is whether you are planning to read what was sent to you on the suggested item, if you're going to read all the other ones, because it is much broader than it's been characterized.
If the individual that sent that would like to make the motion, they can read the item that they sent. When they do that...
The recommendation was sent...
Is your microphone on, Mrs. Lampert?
Yes, thank you for that reminder. It was sent on behalf of two members of this panel, James and Mary Lampert. In the recommendation, which was detailed, it talked not only about vulnerability of CAS, but also largely about a safer method of storage, particularly focusing on the method used in Switzerland. And it was a diagram. And it talked about legislation, what the various options for interim storage were, a two-track approach. It was very detailed, and it highlighted what they were doing at the Vermont Decommissioning Citizen Advisory Panel with a very active subgroup that was making recommendations to the committee, making reports on the status of legislation, reports on the status of site characteristics, what's necessary to get an interim or permanent storage facility accepted, etc. So it was a broad brush approach to what would be a path to take for better safety and security of this huge safety issue that so far had been ignored until we had Dr. Gordon Thompson here, who also not only talked about vulnerability, but talked about what should be done to reduce risk.
So is that a motion, Mrs. Lampert?
Yes.
Do I have a second to that motion?
Yes, you do.
It has been moved, it has been seconded. Any discussion from members of the panel as to whether or not we should cover this particular topic?
Is this in, Mrs. Lambert, I'm sorry, I should have waited to be recognized.
Mrs. Gaslick?
Mrs. Lambert, is this new motion replacing the motion that we have from last meeting?
A motion wasn't made last meeting.
There was a motion at
Yes,
the
ma'am.
last meeting. It did not pass, but this topic was brought up prior to the state agency actors making their statement
Yeah,
about
specifically, the motion,
if I could finish
what did it say?
Mrs. Lampert, if I could finish the explanation. Thank you. This topic was brought up prior to the state agency actors saying that they would only abstain if they got on the first pass. They needed time to go back and talk to folks. So I will permit the motion despite the fact that it was voted on last time, since we didn't know that information when the vote on this particular topic was taken. The motion didn't pass last time, Mary. So you've made a motion now, and it's been seconded. Do we have any discussion as to whether or not this topic should be added to a future agenda of the NDCAP?
Can you repeat it, or are we going to get stuck with the two-pager that Lampert's wrote up? And we're going to have to deal with every line that says, oh, we're only going to deal with this, we're only going to deal with this, we're not going to deal with the rest of reality.
Since I have submitted, may I reply, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Lampert?
Yeah, I think basically what the motion that my wife and I suggested, to put it in what real terms, was we need to look at all aspects of what the hell are we going to do with spent fuel storage. We need to look at interim storage. Holtec has an application pending right now for interim storage. What are its pluses and minuses? We need to look, as Mr. Fortini said, about reprocessing. And if you've been reading the papers, within the last week, the administration has suggested that we go back to reprocessing. It was not a look at just the CAS, look at this or that. It's we have to look at the whole subject of spent fuel storage. As Pines said in her letter covering one of our reports a few years ago, that is the key issue facing the Commonwealth. How do we best deal with spent fuel storage? What recommendations, what facts, what information can we give? That is the crux of the motion. It's not what CAS, it's not do we just look at only do we want to do what's done in Switzerland. It's the broad, what do we do, what do we recommend, what do we know about the pluses and minuses, the industry's view on what they'd want to do about it. Not just mine, not just Mr. Canty's, not just Ms. Dubois. It's the broad subject. That is the substance of the motion.
I'd like to talk of this.
Mr. Noyes? I saw Mr. Noyes' hand.
Go ahead, Dave.
Thanks. I would recommend that we restrict ourselves to an agenda item that can be covered in one meeting. If there are multiple components to this, then let's space them out in future meetings. But having a giant agenda item that's going to consume a year's worth of our meetings isn't going to do anything.
Well, I would also add to that, you need to make a motion that you think would get 11 affirmative votes in order to pass. So that's the procedure that we established back in January for setting future agenda items. So
I just want to say one thing here.
Mr. O'Brien.
Understand, the federal government has a responsibility for spent nuclear fuel in this country. All 110 nuclear plants that were in operations eventually had to have the ability to have dry cask storage, because under the Obama administration, when Harry Reid refused to allow us to use Yucca Mountain, which was built, and the ratepayers all across this country who were part of the operations of those nuclear plants paid to have the building of Yucca Mountain. Billions of dollars was put. When it came time to ship across state lines, he banned it for the use of that. Reprocessing was banned by Jimmy Carter's administration, okay? He stopped that process. The issue is, it's the politics in this country. The issues, there's options of how different countries have done the dry cask storage, but the key is, it falls on the federal government to come up with a place to put this and how we're going to deal with it as a country. Interim storage right now is that each site houses its own dry cask on site. And that's why the federal government is paying them through the lawsuits to cover the cost of building the fizzy pads, the cost of building those dry casks on the site, and then also paying for the actual security force that's used to maintain it for that period of time that they finally come up with a solution. The problem is, that's going to be solved here. It'd be good to talk about it and educate the public on what the process, where we're at, where we are in this country. But the politics is what's going to need to be driven in this country. Somebody has to make a final decision as to what we're going to do with this over the next, 110 nuclear plants. They just built 2 new ones down in Georgia, Vogel. They'll be building more with these small modular reactors throughout the country, Palisades being one with Entergy, as far as Dr. Singh, bringing Palisades back online. Yeah, Oyster Creek, another one. We're going to have multiple things going on. So the idea about the fuel itself, reprocessing would have been good. The other countries do it because of the fact they don't have the natural resources in the country for the ore to be able to build the fuel needed to run the reactor itself. We have an overabundant supply here in this country to be able to create our own uranium. That. Other countries don't have that ability. The reprocessing allows them to reprocess that fuel and use it over and over again. Where you're not creating more spent fuel, you're using the fuel that you've had and try to minimize the amount of fuel that's being produced in this country or in the world. But the idea is the politics need to change. You know, if we want to use it as a forum to try and educate the people on this thing, that's fine, but we're not going to solve the issue about how to change the busy dry gas here in Massachusetts. The politics has been sitting there vacant ever since Harry Reid stopped the ability to put it in Yucca Mountain. I'm sorry. That's it.
Mr. Gottlieb, did you have a point of order?
Yeah, I'd like a point of order that we move the question. We're debating the substance of the issue and not whether we are going to actually talk about it.
Okay.
Mr. Canty, we have a motion on the floor.
We do. We can call, a vote has been called for. You may not. So the vote, the motion that was made and explained by the maker and seconder was to cover the entire topic of dry cask and spent fuel storage in all aspects. That is what the vote that I am about to call is going to be on.
But not at one meeting.
That is the motion that was made. It is the motion that was
Motion was
made.
not made to be one meeting.
It was a future agenda item.
We can check the tape.
Would you like to make a motion to amend your motion?
Yes, yes.
What would you like to do?
That it be a focal point of this group.
That is
limited
outside the
to
scope.
one.
So you would,
Agenda
this is about future, again, this is about future proposals for agenda items. So if you would like to propose a specific agenda item, that is what this is for. This is not about a focus group over a long period of time. So it needs to be a discrete topic that can be covered in one or more meetings. But you'd need to specify that you'd like it to be over multiple meetings.
I would like it to be over multiple meetings. The first meeting would be.
Please turn your microphone on.
I would like it to be a focal point over multiple meetings because of the breadth and importance of the subject. However, for the upcoming meeting, it would be to delineate the importance of the issue and scope of the project going forward.
So you would like it to be about the scope of of dry cask and spent fuel storage going forward.
I think she has made the basic motion. She was making a suggestion as a matter of procedure on how it should be handled over future meetings. That was not to restrict what should be done at any future meeting.
Mrs. Lampert, what would you like to amend your motion to say exactly? Please restate it.
The motion is that this panel take spent fuel storage as an ongoing topic.
That would be out of order. It would need to be an agenda item. So you could.
It would be agenda items going forward, and at the first meeting, we will delineate the scope of the problem and how it will be addressed going forward at subsequent meetings.
So you would like to have an overarching presentation on the scope of the problem of dry cask and spent fuel storage. Would that be accurate?
No, that just.
Of spent fuel storage, period. Dry cask and its vulnerabilities, et cetera, would be just one element. So I would have it broader, spent fuel storage.
Okay.
What are its importance and how to address it to benefit our community going forward.
Okay. Do we have a second to the amended motion, or the individual that made the motion has withdrawn? I will take that as withdrawing the original motion and submitting this motion. Do I have a second to that motion?
Yes.
Mr. Lampert has seconded. I will call for the vote, given we've already discussed it. I understand. Mr. Noyes, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
No.
Mr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Ms. Dubois,
Yep, yes.
Mr. Fortini,
Could I just ask one clarification before I vote on it? Are we talking about, I mean, the DOE is responsible for taking away this spent fuel. What are we actually addressing here? That's what I'm trying to understand.
you're being asked to vote on whether you want to overview the scope of the problem and identifying it and potential next steps that may be voted on as future agenda items. So a yes vote would be to do that. A no vote would be not to do that.
Yes.
Mrs. Gatzlick?
No.
Mr. Lampert?
Yes.
Mrs. Lampert?
Yes.
Mr. Priest?
Abstain.
Mr. Wade?
Abstain.
Mr. Callahan?
Abstain.
Mr. Gottlieb?
Yes.
Ms. Waldron?
Yes.
And myself, I will vote yes. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 2. Oh, I did not. My apologies. Mrs. Castle?
I'll abstain, thank you.
Thank you. 1, 2, 2 noes. And 1, 2, 3, 4. I have a vote of 9 in favor, 2 in opposition, and 4 abstentions. The motion does not carry. That item will not be added to a future agenda at this time. That would bring us to a request for a speaker from Mass DEP to review the status of the Attorney General's Office's review of Holtec's environmental plan. Would anyone like to make a motion to include that on a future agenda?
I make a motion to include that on a future agenda.
Okay, do I have a second? Anyone wish to second adding the Mass DEP speaker to address the status of the Attorney General Office's review of Holtec's environmental plan to a future agenda?
I'll second that, Mary Waldron.
Mary Waldron has seconded. It has been moved. It has been seconded. Any discussion? Mr.
Yes.
Priest?
Yes. So with the resignation of Mr. Pickering from the DEP, they have not provided a replacement for that yet. And this subject was brought to the interagency group and has not been acted upon until they make a determination of the replacement for Mr. Pickering to coordinate having such a speaker and their expertise, and whether they make a determination of whether it's in their court to provide that information rather than the AGO's office.
Are you?
So I'm telling you, the state members will abstain again.
On this item, because until a replacement for
On
Mr.
this item, yes, I would suggest that it be brought back for a revote, so we don't have a negative vote against the subject.
Okay. With that in mind, would you withdraw your motion, Mrs. Gansler?
I withdraw my motion.
And Ms. Waldron, would you withdraw your second?
I withdraw my second.
All right, we will bring that up in the future. Yes, Mr. Priest?
Yep, I'm sorry, there's a lag, that's why there was a delay. I would suggest that we should have a resolution, I think, by the next scheduled meeting. It's appropriate, I think, at that time to bring it back up at that meeting, and we should have resolution for that at that time.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. So, That, we will move on to the next listed potential item, which would be the treatment process for water versus what is being released from the stack. Does anyone wish to make a motion to include that on a future agenda? Hearing and seeing none,
Wait, may I ask a question?
you may.
My question is, why are we voting on anything if the state people?
They said they would abstain on that one. They did not indicate that they would abstain on all
Oh,
yet.
I
So
thought they had to talk to their people
this is
first.
ones that we reviewed last time that I'm
okay.
revisiting. So this is Phase 2, and then we will go to Phase 1 if anyone has any Phase 1 topics. So, again, treatment process for water versus what is being released from the stack. Does anyone wish to make a motion in regards to that?
Could someone clarify what's meant by stack?
Made the motion.
All right. It has been moved. There has been no clarification by what the individual said meant by stack, but I would take it as treatment process for water being evaporated versus what was released during the operation of the plant and any other releases of water. The treatment process for water being released in any capacity.
Are we looking at the treatment process that's been used in the past, or are we talking about the treatment process that will be used in the future, whether the water is discharged or evaporated, or for that matter, perhaps shipped?
We'd be talking about the treatment process for water for future releases or ongoing releases.
And by that, you would include discharges?
If that is a potential future release, so that would be, yes, that would be included.
Mr. Canty,
Yes.
who made this motion, and who are they proposing make this presentation?
So if an item is added on an agenda, it was contingent on us being able to find someone that could speak to that. This may be able to be spoken on by Holtec, potentially, as to what they would do to treat the particular item, water, and the different methods. But if it's something that would require an outside individual, we'd only be able to add it if we could get that individual here. We do not have subpoena authority or the ability to force someone to come in and testify. Mr. McDonough?
Just a comment. I don't believe it holds any relevancy without a deputy's discharge permit approved at this time, so I would recommend that we move it to a later meeting.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Lampert, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, I would make a motion that we add that to an agenda item to provide clarification of the treatment for disposal of the water into the ocean and into the air. What is the treatment process as it is being entered into the environment?
So a motion has been made to discuss the treatment that would be applied to any water that is discharged or is being discharged in any form. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Has been moved, it has been seconded. Any discussion? Hearing and seeing none, I will call for a vote. Mr. Noyes?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Ms. Dubois?
Yes.
Mr. Fortini?
Yes.
Ms. Gatzlick?
Yes.
Mr. Lampert?
Yes.
Mrs. Lampert?
Yes.
Mr. Priest?
Yes.
Ms. Castle?
I'll abstain.
Mr. Wade?
Yes.
Mr. Callahan?
Yes.
Mr. Gottlieb?
Yes.
And Ms. Waldron?
Yes.
Finally, myself, yes. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 14 in favor, 1 abstention, no one voting in the negative, so 14-0 with 1 abstention. So that motion passes, and we will work on adding that item to a future agenda. Now, the voting structure, this was talking about the potential to amend the enabling statute to make it easier for motions to pass, considering, as we've seen at this very meeting, that motions require a high quantum of vote at the handicap in order to pass, due to how our enabling statute was written and passed into law by the legislature. And there was interest by a member of the panel to potentially seek to have that item on an agenda to discuss trying to have the enabling statute modified, presumably by the legislature of the Commonwealth. So does anyone wish to make a motion to add reviewing that to a future agenda?
So moved, because I believe it was my suggestion to begin with.
I believe it was. So it has been moved. Does anyone wish to second it?
Second.
Okay, it has been moved. It has been seconded. Any discussion about whether or not we should add reviewing the voting structure as outlined in the enabling statute of the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel to a future agenda?
I think that if you're going to do that, you
Ms.
should...
Dubois?
Yes, you should include the membership, because I don't know that we can fulfill all the members that are listed in that legislation. Might as well just change it once.
May I speak to that, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Lampert?
I believe one of the suggestions that might be made on this would avoid that problem. The problem is getting rid of the requirement of 11 votes. If we have, as we have on the last two we voted on, where a clear majority of those present and voting wanted to add the items. One discussion that had been had in the past, and I believe one of the former chairs was pushing it, was to basically, things could be done by a majority of those present and voting. So that would be one of the serious things of discussion, but to clearly get rid of the 11.
A majority of those present and voting is how essentially every other board and committee, at least in the town of Plymouth, votes. And there's a quorum requirement that a majority of total membership be in attendance for a meeting to occur, but then only those present and voting affect the outcome of a vote. Whereas the way that this statute is drafted, it requires a majority of total membership, including vacant positions, which is odd. So, it has been, Mr. Noyes, any discussion?
I just think it would be a mistake. Where this panel advises directly to the governor to just go off of a straight majority of members present, to be able to put something out as the position of this panel based on less than half of full membership, I don't think that's right.
Okay. Any other discussion about whether or not we should add this to an agenda? Hearing and seeing none, I will call for a vote. Once again, starting with Mr. Noyes.
No.
Mr. McDonough?
Abstain.
Mr. O'Brien?
No.
Ms. Dubois? Ms. Dubois?
I'm going to abstain.
Okay. Mr. Fortini?
No.
Mrs. Gatzlick?
No.
Mr. Lampert?
Yes.
Mrs. Lampert?
Yes.
Mr. Priest?
Abstain.
Ms. Castle?
Abstain.
Mr. Wade?
Abstain.
Mr. Callahan?
Abstain.
Mr. Gottlieb?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Ms. Waldron?
Yes.
And myself, yes. So that makes it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 to 4 with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have 5 to 4 with 6 abstentions. I have a vote of 5 in favor, 4 opposed, with 6 abstentions. Ironically enough, it doesn't pass for the same reasons in which it exists. All right, well, such is life. That brings us to the next item, which is the CLAP report, which is DPH data and conclusions of independent review. This was, I believe, suggested by Mrs. Lampert. So would anyone wish to make a motion in regards to the CLAP report?
I would so move.
You would so move. Okay, Mr. Noyes has moved. Anyone wish to second?
Wait, what? Where did this come from?
It came from me.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
Could I ask what you mean by the CLAP report?
So we have, a couple of times in this meeting, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Correct?
Yes, you may.
A couple of times in this meeting, by the Board of Health and others, we have cited the CLAP report as if it were indicative of increased cancers associated with the operation of Pilgrim and the release of radiation, as if that were a factual basis. That was not the conclusion of the Department of Public Health, and I think it's important that the Department of Public Health's review of the CLAP report be presented, seeing if we're gonna treat it as if it's a factual representation. I think we should understand what the Department of Public Health had to say about it.
Okay, thank you for that. Mrs. Lampert.
First, it's not called the CLAP report, so I think, to not sound foolish, we should have the proper title of the study. It was called the Southeastern Massachusetts Health Study. And Dr. Clapp's not one of the authors. It was done under Dr. Knorr at the time, who had the responsibility. The actual person who did it was a Dr. Wood. It was published in 1990, so you call it the Southeastern Massachusetts Health Study, 1990. I have the report. Because it's very hard to get it out of DPH. It was mysteriously disappeared. And I have also the journal that reported the result of the industry's review of that report.
Okay.
And so I have the whole history of it.
So is that would you like to second?
Yeah, I'd second it with the proper title.
Okay. Any discussion about whether or not we should add the Southeastern Mass Health Study, 1990, to a future agenda item? All right, hearing none, I will call for a vote. Once again, Mr. Noyes.
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Ms. Dubois?
Yes.
Mr. Fortini?
Yes.
Mrs. Gaslick?
Yes.
Mr. Lampert?
Yes.
Mrs. Lampert?
Yes?
Mr. Priest?
Yes.
Ms. Castle?
Abstain.
Mr. Wade?
Yes.
Mr. Callahan?
Yes.
Mr. Gottlieb?
Yes.
Ms. Waldron?
Yes.
And myself, yes.
So we get Dr. Clapp, come down and talk about it.
14 to 0 with 1.
And Dr. Little.
Yes. I have 14 in favor, 0 and opposed, and 1 abstention, so that will be added to a future agenda. That concludes the review of Phase 1 topics. Would anyone like... Yes?
Sir? Can we have the floor?
Mr. Priest?
I did. Just recognizing that study now is a over 40-year-old study.
I believe it'd be 35 years if it was printed in 1990, but thereabouts, yes.
I believe the study was actually started in 1980.
Well, we will broach the subjects and merits of the report at that future agenda that we just voted to have.
Very good.
Thank you.
So our discussion,
yes,
when we set that agenda, is who's going to present that study?
we will discuss that. Mr. Noyes expressed some interest in the item, but we will.
Yeah, I think it's important that we understand MDPH's position on the study.
Sure. We can.
They're the experts.
Okay.
No, they're not. May I make a comment?
Not at this time. Do we have any other, proposed agenda items for a Phase 1 review? A reminder that we would need these to be reviewed again at the next meeting for the state agency representatives to be able to vote. So if you would like to add a potential item. Yes, Mrs. Gatzlick?
I'm not sure this is going to need a separate agenda, but once we get, the panel has the copy of the site to the MCP 2 site report, I'd like to have the opportunity that we could question Holtec on the results that could be rolled into a general Holtec presentation. So I don't know if it needs to be on the agenda.
I think because it is directly related to their decommissioning process, and I don't think that would require.
Okay, great.
So that can happen as part of the Holtec.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other proposed future agenda items for a Phase 1 review at this time? All right. Hearing and seeing none, that brings us to the last item on our agenda, that being a motion to adjourn. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Ms. Dubois has moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Several members have seconded, but I saw Mr. Noyes speaking, so he will get credit for that. Do we have any objections to adjourning, having concluded our business? Hearing and seeing none, call for the vote. Mr. Noyes?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Ms. Dubois?
Yes.
Mr. Fortini?
Yes.
Mrs. Gatzlick?
Yes.
Mr. Lampert?
Yes.
Mrs. Lampert?
Yes.
Mr. Priest?
Yes.
Ms. Castle?
Yes.
Mr. Wade?
Yes.
Mr. Callahan?
Yes.
Mr. Gottlieb?
Yes.
Ms. Waldron?
Yes.
And myself, yes, it is unanimous. We are adjourned at 9:41 PM. Thank you.